I planned to survive Thanksgiving by smiling on cue and swallowing insults like cold mashed potatoes. But then my grandfather, a billionaire famous for never missing a digit, slammed his hand on the table and read my full name like a verdict. I froze and whispered that I had no idea about it. Before the family could laugh, a lawyer walked in with a briefcase and told us that we could not wait for dessert. My name is Ivy Parker. I am 33 years old, and I analyze contracts for a living at a mid-sized firm called Vireo Crest Solutions. My job requires me to be invisible. I look for the fine print, the missing commas, and the loopholes that could cost a company millions. I am very good at staying quiet and very good at noticing when things do not add up. Yet, as I sat at the dining table in Hawthorne Hills, Connecticut, I felt like a child who had been summoned to the principal's office for a crime she did not commit. The Blackwood estate was less of a home and more of a monument to cold, hard capitalism. The dining room was cavernous, with a ceiling so high that the heat from the fireplace never seemed to reach the table. We were seated at a mahogany table long enough to land a small aircraft on, illuminated by the flickering light of tapered candles that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. The atmosphere was not festive. It was theatrical. Every movement was a performance. Every clink of silverware against fine china was a line of dialogue in a play where everyone knew their role except for me. I had driven 3 hours from the city to be here. I had put on my best navy blue dress, the one that made me look professional and serious, and I had coached myself the entire drive. Keep your head down. Smile when Marla makes a passive-aggressive comment. Agree with whatever Mother says. Do not engage. That was the strategy. Survival. My grandfather sat at the head of the table, Ronan Blackwood. To the world, he was a billionaire industrialist, a man who had built an empire on steel and logistics, famous for never getting a single number wrong in a ledger. To us, he was a force of gravity. He did not speak much. He did not have to. When Ronan shifted in his chair, the rest of the room shifted with him. He was 80 years old, but he had the posture of a general and eyes that looked like they could cut glass. To his right sat my aunt, Marla. She was cutting her turkey with surgical precision. She wore a smile that never quite reached her eyes, the kind of expression one wears when watching a competitor fail. Next to her was my cousin, Dylan. He was roughly my age, dressed in a cashmere sweater that cost $2,000, looking bored and slightly hungover. He kept checking his watch, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. On the other side of the table, my parents sat like sculptures of anxiety. My mother, Tessa, was already on her 3rd glass of Chardonnay. She kept glancing at Ronan, then at me, her eyes pleading with me to remain invisible. My father, Graham, was focused entirely on his mashed potatoes, building a small fortress out of starch to avoid making eye contact with his father-in-law. The silence in the room was heavy. It was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders. The only sounds were the scraping of knives and the occasional clear of a throat. I took a small bite of stuffing. It was cold. Everything in this house was always cold. So, Ivy, Marla said, her voice slicing through the quiet, how is the little job still pushing papers for that startup? It is a consultancy firm, Aunt Marla, I said, keeping my voice even. And it is going well. We just closed a major deal with a pharmaceutical supplier. Fascinating, Dylan drawled, not looking up from his plate. Sounds thrilling. It pays the bills, I said. It was a lie. It barely paid the bills. Between my student loans, the rent on my shoebox apartment, and the inexplicable fees that kept hitting my bank account lately, I was drowning. But I would never tell them that. In this family, struggle was not seen as a hardship. It was seen as a character flaw. Well, Marla said, taking a sip of wine, as long as you are happy living so modestly, some people simply do not have the ambition for more. It is perfectly fine. Ivy, we accept you. I gripped my fork tighter. Do not engage. Thank you. Marla. I looked toward the head of the table. Ronan had stopped eating. He was not looking at Marla. He was not looking at the turkey. He was looking directly at me. His stare was intense, dissecting, devoid of any grandfatherly warmth. It was the look he gave a spreadsheet that refused to balance. He placed his knife and fork down on his plate. The sound rang out like a gunshot in the silent room. "Ivy," Ronan said. His voice was a low rumble, but it carried to the far corners of the room. My stomach dropped. "Yes, grandfather. I was reviewing the quarterly reports for the family holdings yesterday," he said. He did not blink. "I noticed a significant expenditure authorized last week regarding the Lake Briar property, $40,000 for structural renovations." The room went dead silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. I looked at him, confused. "I am sorry." "The Lake Briar property," Ronan repeated, articulating every syllable. "You authorized a $40,000 transfer from the maintenance fund. I want to know why you felt that was necessary without consulting the board. And more importantly, why the contractor invoice looks like it was written by a child." I sat there, my hand holding the fork suspended halfway to my mouth. I blinked. I replayed his words in my head, trying to make them make sense. Lake Briar. Maintenance fund. $40,000. I had a checking account with $400 in it. I had a car that needed a new transmission. I did not have a maintenance fund. I certainly did not have authority over any family holdings. I had been told explicitly, since I was 18, that I was not part of the business. I started, my voice trembling slightly. I cleared my throat and tried again. "I do not know what you are talking about." Ronan's eyes narrowed. "Do not lie to me, Ivy. I tolerate mediocrity. I do not tolerate deceit." "I am not lying," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I have never heard of a Lake Briar property. I do not have access to any family funds. You know that. I have never authorized a transfer for anything." "The authorization was signed by you," Ronan said. His voice rose, just a fraction, but it was enough to make my father flinch. It was signed, dated, and notarized. "Are you telling me that my auditors are wrong?" I looked around the table, desperate for someone to jump in, desperate for someone to say, "Oh, that must be a mistake. Ivy has nothing to do with the estate." I looked at my mother. Tessa was gripping the stem of her wine glass so hard I thought it would shatter. She was staring fixedly at the centerpiece, her face pale. She said nothing. I looked at my father. Graham was studying the tablecloth pattern with the intensity of a scholar. He refused to look up. I looked at Marla. She was smiling. It was a thin, tight smile. A smile that said, "I knew it. I knew you would mess up eventually." "Well," Marla said softly, "it is a lot of responsibility. Ronan, perhaps Ivy just got overwhelmed. You know how she gets with details." "I do not get any way with details," I snapped, breaking my rule. "I analyze contracts for a living. I do not make mistakes with numbers. And I certainly do not spend $40,000 I do not have on a house I have never seen." "Stop it," my mother hissed, finally looking at me. Her eyes were wide with panic. "Ivy, just apologize to your grandfather. Tell him you will fix it." I stared at her. "Apologize? For what, Mom? I did not do this." "Do not make a scene," my father muttered, still looking at the table. "Please, Ivy, just take responsibility." The injustice of it hit me like a physical blow. They were not surprised. They were not confused. They were terrified, and they were throwing me to the wolves to save themselves. They wanted me to confess to a phantom crime just to make Ronan stop staring. Ronan slammed his hand down on the table. The heavy oak surface shuddered. The silverware jumped. "Enough," he roared. I froze. I felt the blood drain from my face. I felt small. I felt 5 years old again, being scolded for spilling grape juice on the white carpet. Except this time, I was holding the empty glass, and I had no memory of drinking it. "I want an explanation," Ronan demanded, pointing a finger at me. "Right now. Where did the money go?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My brain was firing on all cylinders, trying to find a logical explanation. But there was none. I was being framed, or I was going insane. There was no middle ground. "I have no idea about it," I whispered. It was the only truth I had. "Pathetic," Dylan muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "Always the victim." "Ivy," Ronan said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. If you cannot explain where $40,000 went, then you are either incompetent or a thief. Which is it? I am neither, I cried, my voice cracking. I do not know about Lake Briar. I do not have any money. Ask Mom, ask Dad. They know I barely make rent. My mother shut her eyes tight. Ivy, stop shouting. Tell him, I pleaded. Tell him I have nothing to do with the estate. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched out, agonizing and cruel. Marla took another bite of turkey, chewing slowly. Dylan checked his watch again. My parents seemed to have turned to stone. I was alone. I had always been alone in this family, but I had never felt the distance as acutely as I did in that moment. I was the scapegoat. I was the one they kept around to make themselves feel better, the failure that made their success look brighter, and now, I was the villain in whatever twisted narrative they had spun. Ronan stared at me, his disappointment radiating off him in waves. He looked ready to cast me out, to cut me off from the family entirely, not that there was much left to cut. And then, the front door opened. It was not a quiet opening. The heavy double doors of the main entrance were thrown wide, letting a gust of cold November wind rush into the hallway and spill into the dining room. The candles on the table flickered violently, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. We all turned. A man walked into the dining room. He was wearing a black suit that was tailored to perfection, sharp enough to cut. He was not family. He was not staff. He carried a leather briefcase in his left hand, and his face was set in an expression of grim determination. He looked like an undertaker who had just realized the body was missing. He stopped at the foot of the table, directly opposite Ronan. He did not apologize for the intrusion. He did not introduce himself to the room at large. He looked straight at my grandfather. I am the family attorney, Callum Reed, he said. His voice was baritone, steady, and completely devoid of fear. Ronan's eyes narrowed. I know who you are, Mr. Reed. You were not invited to dinner. We cannot wait for dessert, Callum said. He walked forward, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. He ignored Marla, who had half risen from her chair with an indignant expression. He ignored my parents, who looked like they were about to faint. He stopped beside me. He did not look at me, but his presence felt like a shield. He placed the leather briefcase on the table, right next to the gravy boat. What is the meaning of this? Marla demanded. Who do you think you are, barging in here? I am the person who is about to save this family from a federal indictment, Callum said calmly, still looking at Ronan. Or perhaps, just one member of it. Ronan looked at the briefcase. Then he looked at Callum. For the first time all night, the absolute certainty in my grandfather's face wavered. He looked at me, then back at the lawyer. A flicker of something crossed his face. Doubt, fear. It was gone too fast to tell. The tension in the room shifted. It was no longer the tension of a grandfather scolding a granddaughter. It was the tension of a bomb squad arriving to cut the red wire. You have 3 minutes, Ronan said, his voice cold steel. I do not need 3 minutes, Callum replied. He rested his hand on the brass latches of the briefcase. I need you to listen. Ronan, throw him out, Marla said, her voice shrill. This is ridiculous. Ivy probably hired him to stage a distraction. Quiet, Ronan snapped, without looking at her. He kept his eyes on the briefcase. Open it, right now. Callum Reed did not open the briefcase immediately. He placed it on the white tablecloth with a deliberate slowness that made the silence in the room scream. The heavy click of the metal latch against the wood was the only sound in the world. He kept his hand on the leather handle, standing there like a statue carved out of judgment, letting the anticipation rot the air around us. It felt less like a family dinner and more like a tribunal where the verdict had already been decided, but the sentence was yet to be read. I stared at the briefcase. It looked expensive, battered, but well cared for. The kind of object that contained secrets capable of ruining lives. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that felt entirely out of place in this cold, controlled room. $40,000. The number echoed in my head, bouncing around like a trapped bird. It was an obscene amount of money. It was more than I made in 8 months after taxes. The idea that I had spent it on renovations for a property I had never heard of was so ludicrous that I almost wanted to laugh. But the laughter died in my throat, choked off by the heavy, suffocating fear that I was losing my mind. For a terrifying second, I wondered if I had done it. This was the poison my family had been feeding me for years. They had planted these seeds of doubt so deep that even now, faced with a mathematical impossibility, my first instinct was to question my own sanity. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. I hid them in my lap. I was not a Blackwood heiress. Not really. I carried the blood, but I did not carry the card. After college, I had walked away from the expectation that I would marry well or work in some nepotistic charity role. I wanted to build something that was mine, even if it was small. I worked 2 jobs to pay off my student loans because my father said it would build character. I lived in a 4th-floor walk-up in a neighborhood where the sirens were a nightly lullaby. I clipped coupons. I waited for sales on winter coats. I knew the price of a gallon of milk down to the cent. I did not smell like old money. I smelled like subway exhaust and cheap coffee. But for the last 3 years, even that small, hard-won independence had felt like it was slipping through my fingers, dissolving like sugar in hot water. I remembered the apartment I had applied for 2 years ago. It was perfect. A sun-drenched studio closer to my office. I had the deposit ready. I had the references. Then the landlord had called me, his voice dripping with awkward, polite rejection. He told me that my background check had flagged some inconsistencies. He would not say what they were. He just said he could not take the risk. I remembered the job at the logistics firm. It was a senior analyst role, a huge step up. I had crushed the interviews. The hiring manager had practically offered me the job in the room. Then, 2 days later, the email came. The position had been put on hold, indefinitely. A week later, I saw on LinkedIn that they had hired someone else. I remembered my credit score dropping 40 points overnight for no reason I could find. When I called the bureau, they gave me runaround answers about inquiries I never made and accounts I never opened. Every time these things happened, I went to my parents. I went to them because I was scared and confused, and I needed someone to tell me that the world wasn't conspiring against me, and every time, they spun the same narrative. I looked across the table at my mother, Tessa. She was staring at the lawyer's hand on the briefcase, her face a mask of brittle porcelain. I remembered sitting at her kitchen island 6 months ago, crying because my car had broken down and I didn't have the money to fix the transmission. She had poured me tea and patted my hand. She had said, "Oh, Ivy, you are just overwhelmed. You take on too much. You know you have always been fragile when things get tough. Maybe you are just imagining that the mechanic is overcharging you. You get so emotional about these things. Fragile, emotional, overwhelmed." Those were the words they used to build the cage. My father, Graham, had been no better. When I told him about the job offer vanishing, he hadn't been angry on my behalf. He had sighed, a long, tired sound, and said, "Don't make a big deal out of it. Ivy, maybe it is for the best. You do not handle stress well. We just want you to be safe. Why do you always have to chase things that are out of your reach?" They had convinced me that I was the problem. They had convinced me that I was incapable of navigating the adult world, that my failures were a result of my own inherent instability. They made me feel like a child who needed a harness. But looking at them now, in the flickering candlelight of the dining room, I saw something that shattered that illusion. They were not looking at me with pity. They were not looking at me with the weary concern of parents dealing with a problem child. My father was sweating. A single bead of perspiration rolled down his temple. My mother was not breathing. She was holding her breath, her chest frozen. My Aunt Marla was gripping her napkin so tight her knuckles were white. They were not shocked that money was missing. They were terrified that it was being discussed. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They knew, all of them. They knew about the $40,000. They knew about Lake Briar. They knew about the maintenance fund. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a glitch in the matrix. This was a cover-up, and I was the patsy. The silence in the room had stretched to its breaking point. Ronan Blackwood had not moved his eyes from me. He was watching me process this. He was watching the confusion on my face turn into realization, and then into horror. He was a man who had made billions by reading people, by spotting the bluff across a negotiation table. He was reading me now. He was looking for the guilt. He was looking for the nervous tick of a liar. But all he saw was the raw, naked shock of a woman who had just realized her entire reality was a stage set. Ronan turned his gaze to the lawyer. "Callum, you said we cannot wait for dessert. Explain." Callum finally moved. He did not open the briefcase yet. He simply stood taller, his presence dominating the room. "Sir, 10 minutes ago, I received a notification from the bank regarding the trust oversight protocols, an automated flag. It seems that while we were sitting here eating turkey, an attempt was made to access the secure archives of the Blackwood Family Trust, specifically, the files related to Ivy Parker." Marla dropped her fork. It clattered against her plate, loud and sharp. "That is absurd," she said, her voice high and tight. "Who would be accessing archives on Thanksgiving?" "That is the question," Callum said. "But the access attempt came from an IP address associated with this house." The air left the room. Ronan slowly turned his head. He looked at Marla. Then he looked at Dylan. Then he looked at my parents. His expression was unreadable, which made it terrifying. "Someone at this table," Ronan said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream, "is trying to erase their tracks before I find out what they have done." "Dad, please," my mother said, her voice trembling. "This is getting out of hand. Ivy is clearly confused. We can sort this out in the morning. Let's not ruin the holiday." "The holiday is already ruined, Tessa," Ronan said. He did not look at her. He looked back at me. His eyes were different now. The coldness was still there, but the anger had shifted. It was no longer directed entirely at me. There was a curiosity there, a sudden, sharp need to verify a variable he had not considered. "Ivy," he said. I straightened my spine. My hands were still shaking, but I forced myself to look him in the eye. "Yes. You said you have no idea about the money. You said you have no idea about the house." "I don't," I said. "I swear to you, I live in a studio apartment in Queens. I drive a 12-year-old car. I have never seen $40,000 in one place in my entire life." Ronan studied me. He looked at my cheap dress. He looked at my scuffed heels. He looked at the way my hair was tied back in a messy bun because I couldn't afford a salon visit. He was seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time in years. "I have sent you letters," Ronan said. The statement hung in the air. I blinked. "What?" "Letters," Ronan repeated. "Every month, for the last 3 years, on the first of the month, handwritten, sent via certified mail to the address your mother provided for you." I felt the room tilt. "I never got any letters," I said. Ronan leaned forward. "Think, Ivy, thick envelopes, ivory paper, my personal seal. I sent them to the address on West 4th Street, then the address on Maple Avenue. I sent them to update you, to ask you questions, to guide you." I shook my head, confusion swirling like smoke. "I have lived at those addresses, but I never received anything from you. The only things I get are bills and junk mail." "Every month?" Ronan asked. 36 letters. You never saw one." "Never," I said. "Not one. Grandfather, I thought you didn't care. I thought you had written me off." The admission tasted like ash in my mouth. It was the hurt I had buried deep. The rejection I had pretended didn't matter. I thought he ignored me because I wasn't successful enough, because I wasn't a shark like him. Ronan's face hardened. The granite features seemed to set into something permanent and dangerous. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, toward my mother. Tessa was not drinking her wine anymore. She was staring at the tablecloth. Her face drained of all color. Her lips were pressed together in a thin, bloodless line. "Tessa," Ronan said. My mother flinched. "You told me Ivy was receiving them," Ronan said. "You told me she was reading them. You told me she found them overwhelming. You told me she asked for space. You told me she didn't want to reply because she was intimidated by the responsibility." "She is," Tessa blurted out, her voice cracking. "She is intimidated. Look at her. Dad, she can barely handle a dinner conversation. I was protecting her." "You were intercepting my mail," Ronan said. "It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. I was filtering, Tessa cried. She was going through a hard time. She had the credit issues, the job issues. I didn't want to add to her burden. So you stole from her? Ronan asked. I didn't steal, Tessa shrieked. I just kept them safe until she was ready. Ready for what? I asked. My voice was quiet, but it cut through her hysteria. Ready to know that my grandfather actually wanted to talk to me. Tessa looked at me, and for a second, the mask fell completely. There was no love in her eyes. There was only panic and a strange, twisted resentment. She looked at me like I was an inconvenience that had suddenly started talking back. You don't understand, she hissed at me. You never understand complex things, Ivy. That is why we have to handle them for you. That is enough, Callum interrupted. He didn't shout. He just spoke with the authority of a man who held all the cards. He reached out and finally, flipped the latches of the briefcase. Snap, snap. The sound was like 2 gunshots. He lifted the lid. Inside, there were no messy piles of paper. There were color-coded files, thick and organized. He pulled out a blue folder and placed it on the table. This is not a family dispute, Callum said, opening the folder. This is evidence of systematic fraud. Ronan looked at the folder, then at his daughter. You said she was unstable, Ronan said to Tessa. You said she was incapable. You told me that for 3 years. She is, Tessa insisted, grasping at straws. She gets anxiety. She panics. I panic because my life has been falling apart for 3 years. I yelled, slamming my hand on the table. The sudden burst of anger felt good. It felt clean. And now I know why. It wasn't bad luck. It was you. Ronan looked at me. He saw the anger. He saw the fire. And for the first time that night, he didn't look disappointed. He looked interested. Callum, Ronan said, his eyes still locked on mine. Show her. Callum slid a document across the polished wood. It stopped right in front of me. Mrs. Parker claims she was protecting you from the burden of the estate, Callum said. But the records show a different story. This is the deed to the property at Lake Briar. I looked down at the paper. It was a transfer deed, dated 3 years ago. It transferred the ownership of a commercial property, a building with retail space and apartments from the Blackwood Trust to Ivy Parker. I gave you this 3 years ago, Ronan said softly. It was not a test. It was a safety net, an asset to generate income so you would never have to struggle while you found your path. It generates $12,000 a month in rent. I stared at him. $12,000 a month. I had been eating instant noodles and freezing in the winter to save on heating bills, while I owned a building that made $12,000 a month. Where is the money? I whispered. That, Callum said, pulling another sheet of paper from the briefcase, is what we are here to discuss, because according to this bank authorization, you signed over the management rights to a third party. He pointed to a signature at the bottom of the page. It read, Ivy Parker. I looked at it. It was a good forgery, but it wasn't mine. The loops on the P were too wide. The slant was wrong. I didn't sign this, I said. We know, Callum said. Because on the date this was signed, your credit card records place you at a dental clinic in Queens for an emergency root canal. You were under anesthesia. Tessa made a small, choking sound. Ronan stood up. He didn't rush. He rose like a mountain rising from the sea. He placed his hands on the table and leaned forward, looming over his daughter and her husband. You lied to me, Ronan said. You intercepted my letters. You forged her signature, and you let her live in poverty while you siphoned off her income. It wasn't like that, Graham shouted, finally speaking up. His face was red, his eyes bulging. We didn't spend it. It's complicated. Ronan, we were managing it, the taxes, the upkeep, the overhead is huge. Graham, Ronan said. Shut up. He turned back to me. Ivy, he said, do you want to know the rest? I looked at the terrified faces of my parents. I looked at the smug, nervous face of my aunt. I looked at the bored, sweaty face of my cousin. They were all waiting for me to break. They were waiting for me to say, I have no idea about it, and let them fix it. Let them sweep it under the rug. I took a deep breath. The air in the room tasted different now. It didn't taste like fear anymore. It tasted like gunpowder. "Yes," I said. "I want to know everything." Callum Reed did not merely open the briefcase. He dissected the room with it. The leather lid fell back to reveal an interior that was terrifyingly organized. There were no loose papers, no chaotic jumbles of notes. Instead, there were rows of files, each color-coded with a precision that suggested a surgical strike rather than a legal consultation. Red files, blue files, yellow files. Each one had a label typed in a stark, sans-serif font, accompanied by dates that spanned the last 36 months. The air in the dining room seemed to lock into place. The oxygen grew thin. It felt less like a holiday dinner and more like the inside of a pressurized cabin seconds before the hull breached. Ronan Blackwood remained standing. He did not look at the files. He did not have to. He knew exactly what was in them. He looked at me, and for a moment, the hardness in his eyes softened into something that looked uncomfortably like regret. 3 years ago, Ronan began, his voice steady but carrying a resonance that vibrated in the crystal glasses. I made a decision. I looked at the family dynamics. I looked at the trajectory of the market. And I looked at you. Ivy. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Me. You were struggling, Ronan said. I saw it. You were proud, too proud to ask for help. But I saw the weight on your shoulders. I decided to create a shield, not a gift. I do not believe in handouts that cripple the recipient. I believe in tools. He gestured to Callum. The lawyer pulled a thick, blue-bound document from the front of the stack. I established a separate holding entity, Ronan continued. Independent of the main family trust, independent of your mother, independent of Marla. It was designed to be a standalone asset shield, something that would guarantee your security regardless of what happened to the rest of the Blackwood estate. Callum placed the document in front of me. The cover page was heavy, textured paper. The asset in question, Ronan said, is a commercial property in Lake Briar, upstate New York. It consists of a corner lot on Main Street, 3,000 square feet of retail space on the ground floor, and 4 residential units on the second and third floors. My ears were ringing. Lake Briar. I knew the town. It was an upscale, artsy hamlet where people from the city bought weekend homes. The property was appraised last month, Callum added, his tone devoid of emotion. Current market value is $2,950,000. The number hit me like a physical slap. Almost $3 million, I whispered. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. And it is unencumbered, Ronan said. No mortgage, paid in full. It generates revenue. It has been generating revenue since the day I signed the deed over to you. I stared at the document, but the words blurred. 3 years ago, I closed my eyes, and the memory of 3 years ago washed over me. I was living in a basement apartment in Astoria with a roommate who stole my yogurt. I was driving a Honda that shook when it went over 50 miles an hour. I was skipping meals 2 days a week to afford the minimum payment on my student loans. I remembered a specific Tuesday when I had cried in my car for 20 minutes because I was short $40 for a dental copay. I was worth $3 million then. I was rich, I was safe, I was secure. And I was crying over $40. This is impossible, I said. Opening my eyes, I looked at my parents. I was broke. I was drowning. You knew I was drowning. I asked you for a loan to fix my radiator, and you told me it would be a good lesson in budgeting. Graham looked away, studying the intricate carving on his chair arm. Tessa, however, did not look away. She was staring at me with a strange, frantic intensity. It is not that simple. Ivy, Tessa said, her voice high and breathless. Property is complex. Taxes, insurance, liability. We were handling it. We didn't want you to be burdened with the administration while you were trying to find yourself. Find myself, I repeated. I wasn't backpacking in Europe. Mom, I was working 60 hours a week, entry-level jobs. Exactly, Tessa said, seizing on the point. You were busy. You were stressed. If we had dropped a commercial real estate portfolio on you, you would have collapsed. We were protecting you. Show her the transfer, Ronan commanded. Callum flipped the blue folder open. He slid a single page out and rotated it so it faced me. It was a document titled Delegation of Authority and Power of Attorney. It authorized the transfer of all management rights, income collection, and operational decisions regarding the Lakebriar property to an LLC I had never heard of, and at the bottom of the page, there was a signature, Ivy Parker. I stared at the ink. It was blue. It was a ballpoint pen. It looked confident. It looked official. But it was wrong. The I was too tall. The Y looped backward in a way I never did. The P was sharp, aggressive, lacking the slight hesitation I always had when signing legal documents. I did not sign this, I said. My voice was shaking, not with fear, but with a rising hot fury. I have never seen this piece of paper in my life. Tessa let out a short, nervous laugh. It sounded like glass breaking. Oh, Ivy, don't be silly. You forget things all the time. Remember when you lost your keys last Christmas? You were in such a state back then. You probably signed it in a rush and forgot all about it. You know how your memory gets when you are anxious. She looked around the table, inviting everyone to join in the consensus. Poor Ivy, so scatterbrained, so unreliable. Look at the date, Ivy, Tessa urged. It was right around the time you broke up with that boyfriend. You were a mess. You just don't remember. For a second, the gaslighting almost worked. The habit of doubting myself was so ingrained, so practiced, that I felt a flicker of uncertainty. Was I that stressed? Did I sign something without looking? Then I looked at the signature again. I looked at the specific way the K in Parker was formed. It had a little flourish at the end, a decorative kick. No, I said firmly. Ivy, my father warned, his voice low. Don't call your mother a liar. She is lying, I said. I looked up at Tessa. You taught me how to sign my name. Tessa froze. What? When I was 12, I said, keeping my eyes locked on hers. We were at the kitchen table. I was practicing for my first passport. You told me that a lady never loops her Y like a pig's tail. You made me practice it 100 times until the tail went straight down. You said it looked elegant. I pointed at the document. That Y loops like a pig's tail. I said, I haven't written a Y like that in 20 years, because you trained me not to. The silence that followed was absolute. Tessa's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The detailed, specific nature of the memory stripped away her vague accusations of forgetfulness. Callum Reed cleared his throat. The sound was dry and professional. The anecdote is compelling, Callum said, but the forensic analysis is definitive. He reached into the briefcase again and pulled out a transparent sheet. He laid it over the document. It was a digital overlay of my actual signature, pulled from my bank records. This is the signature card from Miss Parker's primary checking account, Callum explained to the room. And this is the signature on the power of attorney. He held them up. They did not match. They did not even look like cousins. The pressure points were different. The slant was different. The spacing was different. The variance is beyond the threshold of natural deviation, Callum stated. This is a forgery, and not a particularly sophisticated one. It appears the forger assumed that no one would ever audit the file. Ronan turned his body. He was no longer facing me. He was facing my parents. You told me she was unstable, Ronan said. His voice was not loud, but it was terrifying. It was the voice of a man who was rewriting his will in his head. For 3 years, every time I asked about the property, every time I asked why Ivy hadn't responded to my letters, you told me she was having episodes. You told me she was too fragile to handle the responsibility. She is fragile, Tessa cried out, tears finally spilling over, real tears, or panic tears. I could not tell. Dad, you don't see her. She lives in that awful apartment. She works that dead-end job. She can't manage an estate. She lives in that apartment because you stole her house, Ronan roared. The shout echoed off the high ceilings. I gave her a shield, Ronan yelled, slamming his hand on the table again. And you turned it into your personal piggy bank. You didn't just take the money. You took her confidence. You took her reality. He pointed a shaking finger at Graham. And you sat there and nodded. You told me last Christmas that Ivy was finding her footing while you were spending her rent money." Graham looked down at his plate, his face a mask of shame and fear. "I thought it was temporary. We were going to pay it back. The market took a dip, and we needed liquidity for the house in the Hamptons." "The house in the Hamptons," I repeated. I felt cold. Ice cold. Last summer, they had renovated their summer home. They had put in a new pool and a custom outdoor kitchen. I had seen the photos on Facebook. I had liked the photos. I had commented. "Looks beautiful." Mom, while sitting in my apartment with no air conditioning, eating a sandwich for dinner, I had congratulated them on spending my money. I looked at the document again. The forged signature stared back at me. It wasn't just a crime. It was a violation. It was identity theft committed by the people who had given me my name. "You didn't just hide a gift," I said. The realization washed over me, clear and devastating. "You weren't hiding a bonus. You weren't hiding a trust fund." I looked at Tessa. Her mascara was running. She looked old. "You hid my life," I said. "You let me struggle. You let me cry. You let me believe I was a failure. You let me believe I couldn't survive in the world. And you did it while you were cashing checks with my name on them." Marla, who had been quiet, tried to regain some ground. She picked up her wine glass, her hand shaking slightly. "Well," she said, "now that we know, surely we can arrange a repayment plan. There is no need for police or lawyers. We are family. After all, Ivy, darling, you don't want to see your parents in trouble, do you?" Callum looked at Marla. He didn't smile. "I'm afraid that option is no longer on the table," Callum said, because the power of attorney wasn't just used to collect rent. He reached into the briefcase for a third time. He pulled out a red file. "It was also used to leverage the property," Callum said. 6 months ago, the Lakebriar property was transferred out of Ivy's name entirely. It was sold." "Sold?" I gasped. "For $1, Callum said. He slid the deed across the table. "Sold to a holding company called Juniper Vale Holdings," Callum said. "And Juniper Vale Holdings is not owned by your parents." Callum turned his gaze slowly toward Marla. "It is registered to you, Mrs. Marla Blackwood Vane." The room went silent again, but this time, it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of a predator realizing it had been cornered. Marla stopped drinking her wine. She set the glass down. She dabbed her mouth with her napkin. "I was saving it," Marla said coolly. "Tessa and Graham were mismanaging the funds. I stepped in to protect the asset. I was going to give it back to Ivy when she was ready." "By buying it for $1, Ronan asked. "It is a standard legal maneuver," Marla said, smoothing her skirt. "It is theft," Callum said, "and unlike the mismanagement of funds, this triggers the immediate dissolution clause in the grandfather's original trust instructions, which is why I am here." I looked at them, my mother, the manipulator, my father, the coward, my aunt, the thief, and my grandfather, the judge. I wasn't a guest at dinner. I was the evidence. "Keep reading, Callum," Ronan said. "I want Ivy to see the mortgage documents." "Mortgage?" I asked. "Yes," Callum said. "Marla didn't just take the property. She used it as collateral." He opened the red file further. "She took out a $1.5 million loan against the equity of the building," Callum said, "to fund a construction project in the city." He looked at Dylan, my cousin, who had been checking his watch and looking bored. Suddenly went very still. "A project managed by your firm, Dylan," Callum said. Dylan's face went white. "I didn't know where the capital came from," Dylan stammered. "Mom just said she secured financing. She said it was private equity." "It was private," Callum agreed. "It was Ivy's." I looked at my cousin. The sweater he was wearing probably cost more than my car. "And it was bought with a loan secured against a building that was supposed to be my safety net." I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I forced them to hold me. "You are all sick," I said. "Every single one of you." "Ivy, sit down," Tessa snapped. "You are making a scene." "I am not making a scene," I said. "I am making a discovery." I looked at Ronan. "You knew," I said to him. "You must have suspected something. That is why you brought the lawyer." "I suspected incompetence," Ronan said. I suspected laziness. I did not suspect that my own children were cannibalizing their offspring. He looked at the papers scattered on the table. The colorful files looked like confetti at a funeral. I have no idea about it, I said, repeating the words I had spoken earlier. But this time, they weren't an apology. They were an accusation. I had no idea about any of it, but I do now. Callum closed the briefcase. The sound was final. "We are just getting started, Miss Parker," he said. "The rabbit hole goes much deeper than just the house. Open the next file," Ronan ordered. Callum reached for a yellow folder. "This," Callum said, "is the employment history investigation." Callum Reed did not let the shock of the $1 sale dissipate. He utilized it. He treated the dining room not as a place of familial gathering, but as a sterile operating theater where he was dissecting a cadaver. And that cadaver was my family's integrity. He reached into the red folder and extracted a document that was stapled with a heavy, industrial-grade fastener. He placed it in the center of the table, rotating it so that the header was visible to everyone. It was the Articles of Incorporation for a company called Juniper Vale Holdings. "Juniper Vale Holdings," Callum said, his voice level and terrifyingly calm. "A limited liability company registered in Delaware. On paper, it looks anonymous. Standard registered agent. Generic address. It is the entity that purchased the Lake Briar property from Ivy Parker for the sum of $1. He looked at Marla. My aunt was sitting very straight, her posture rigid. She had recovered from her initial flinch and was now wearing a mask of indignant capability. She looked like a CEO who was annoyed by a shareholder question, not a criminal who had been caught. "It is a holding vehicle," Marla said, her voice crisp. "I set it up to manage the asset. Ivy was clearly incapable of handling the tax implications of a commercial property. I was moving the asset into a structure where it could be protected from her own negligence. The $1 transfer is a standard nominal consideration for interfamily transfers. Ask any lawyer." "I am a lawyer," Callum replied. "And I am asking you?" He slid another piece of paper across the table. It was a forensic report on a digital file. "You claim you set this up to protect Ivy," Callum said. "You also claimed earlier, before dinner, that you were in St. Bart's during the week of June 12th. You posted photos on Instagram. You told your father you were unreachable." Marla narrowed her eyes. It was a much-needed detox." "Then how did you print the transfer deed?" Callum asked. He tapped the paper on the table. "This is the metadata from the physical file of the deed," Callum explained, addressing Ronan but keeping his eyes on Marla. "Modern printers leave a microscopic code on every page they produce, yellow dots, barely visible to the naked eye, that encode the serial number of the machine and the exact time of printing. This deed was printed on June 12th at 4 p.m. on a Canon Image Runner Advance, serial number ending in 459. Callum paused for effect. "That is the printer in your home office in Greenwich. Marla, unless your printer flew to St. Bart's, you were in Connecticut. You staged a vacation to establish an alibi for a transaction you knew was fraudulent." Marla's mouth twitched. The smooth veneer of the sophisticated socialite cracked, revealing the desperate, calculating operator underneath. She had not just stolen from me. She had planned it. She had built a narrative. She had created a fake timeline. "I may have come back early," Marla stammered, her face flushing a patchy red. "I had a meeting. I didn't want to worry Dad. This is irrelevant. The point is the property is safe." "Safe," I interrupted. My voice was hoarse. "You call it safe." Callum turned to me. "It is not just about the title, Ivy. It is about the cash flow." He opened a spreadsheet that was dense with numbers. "The Lake Briar property is not an empty lot," Callum said. "It houses a boutique bakery on the ground floor that has been there for 10 years. There is a yoga studio on the second floor. There are 2 residential tenants on the third. They pay rent, consistently, on the 1st of every month." He ran his finger down the column of figures. "Total monthly revenue is $12,400. After taxes and maintenance, the net profit is roughly $9,000 a month." I stared at the number. $9,000 every month. "For 3 years," Callum said. "That money has been deposited into a checking account under Juniper Vale Holdings, and from there, It has been transferred to a personal account. He looked at Marla. Yours? The room spun. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grip the edge of the table. I wasn't seeing the numbers anymore. I was seeing my life over the past 3 years. I saw myself standing in the pharmacy line last February. I had a strep throat infection that felt like swallowing glass. The pharmacist told me the copay for the good antibiotics was $45. I had $12 in my checking account. I told him I didn't need them. I went home and gargled salt water and cried for 3 days because the pain was so bad I couldn't sleep. I saw my car, the Honda with the rattling muffler. I remembered the mechanic telling me the brake pads were dangerous. He quoted me $300. I didn't have it. I drove on those brakes for 4 months, terrified every time I had to stop at a red light, praying the pedal wouldn't go to the floor. I saw the nights I ate toast for dinner because I was saving up for a new pair of work shoes. I didn't have money for medicine, I said. It came out as a whisper. But in the silence of the room, it was a scream. I looked at Marla. She was wearing a diamond necklace. Last winter, I said, my voice shaking with a rage that felt bottomless. I had strep throat. I didn't buy the antibiotics because I was short $30. I lay in bed with a fever of 102, shivering, while you were collecting $9,000 of my money. Marla flinched. She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. And when my car broke down, I continued, and I had to walk 2 miles to the train station in the freezing rain because I couldn't afford a tow truck, you were in St. Bart's, or pretending to be. My father, Graham, cleared his throat loudly. He looked desperate to change the frequency of the conversation, to pull it back from this raw, ugly, emotional reality to something he could manage. Now, Ivy, Graham said, his hands fluttering nervously over his plate. Let's not be dramatic. I am sure there is a reasonable explanation. Maybe the funds were being held in escrow, or maybe look, accounting is messy. It could just be an error, a routing number mistake. We can audit it and fix it. Ronan turned his head slowly to look at Graham. The look on his face was one of absolute disgust. An accounting error, Ronan said, tasting the words like sour milk. Graham, an accounting error is a decimal point in the wrong place. An accounting error is a lost receipt. Ronan leaned forward, his voice dropping to a growl. An accounting error does not sell a $3 million asset for $1. An accounting error does not falsify a vacation. An accounting error does not forge a signature. Graham shrank back into his chair. I just meant. You meant to excuse it, Ronan said. Because you are weak, and because you benefited from it. Callum did not let the momentum die. He was relentless. The rent is the smaller issue, Callum said. The $9,000 a month is petty theft compared to what happened next. He turned the page of the red file. Once Juniper Vale Holdings acquired the title, Callum said, Marla didn't just sit on it, she leveraged it. He pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper. It was a mortgage agreement. 6 months ago, Callum stated, Juniper Vale Holdings took out a commercial loan against the Lake Briar property. The lender is a private equity group in the city. The loan amount is $1.5 million, I gasped. She mortgaged my house. She cashed out the equity, Callum corrected. She took a loan on a property she stole. If Juniper Vale defaults on that loan, the bank takes the building, your building, Ivy. But why? I asked. What did she need $1.5 million for? Callum turned his gaze to the other side of the table. He looked at Dylan. My cousin was freezing. He had been trying to look invisible, sipping his water, checking his phone under the table. But now, the spotlight was on him, and it was blinding. The loan proceeds, Callum said. Were wired directly to a corporate account for a development project called the Aurora Complex. Dylan dropped his glass. It didn't break, but water spilled across the expensive tablecloth, spreading like a dark stain. The Aurora Complex. Callum read from the file. A luxury condominium project in Brooklyn. The developer on record is Dylan Vane. The room fell into a stunned silence. I looked at Dylan, my cousin, the entrepreneur, the one who always bragged about his hustle, his vision, his ability to spot trends. He had been posting about the Aurora Complex for months on LinkedIn. Groundbreaking design, future of living. He had been hailed as a prodigy. "You," I said. I looked at him with genuine disbelief. "You stole my house to build condos." "I didn't steal anything," Dylan shouted. His voice was high, cracking with panic. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "I didn't know Mom told me she found an investor. She said she secured a silent partner." "Sit down, Dylan," Ronan commanded. "No, grandfather, you have to listen," Dylan pleaded, his hands shaking. "I needed the capital to break ground. The banks were stalling because I didn't have enough collateral. Mom said she had a solution. She said she had an LLC that believed in the vision. She never told me it was Ivy's property. I thought it was her money." "You thought your mother suddenly had $1.5 million lying around?" Ronan asked. "And you didn't ask where it came from?" "She said it was from her divorce settlement," Dylan cried. "I didn't ask questions, I just needed the money." Callum looked at Dylan with the cold detachment of a prosecutor. "Ignorance is not a defense in a federal wire fraud case," Callum said, "especially when you are the signatory on the receiving account." Dylan went pale. "Federal what?" "The money was obtained through fraud," Callum explained. "The property was stolen. The mortgage was fraudulent. That makes the $1.5 million proceeds of a crime, by accepting that money and using it to pay contractors and buy materials. You have engaged in money laundering." Dylan looked like he was going to be sick. He looked at his mother. "Mom," Dylan whispered, "is that true? Is the money dirty?" Marla did not look at her son. She was staring at the table, her jaw set. She was calculating. She was trying to figure out if she could sacrifice Dylan to save herself. "It was an investment," Marla said tightly. "The Aurora complex is going to make millions. We were going to pay the loan back before anyone knew. Ivy would have her property, and we would have the profit. It was a business decision." "It was a gamble," Callum said, "with chips that didn't belong to you." "And if the project failed?" I asked. I looked at Dylan. "If your condos didn't sell, if the market crashed, what then?" Dylan didn't answer. He knew the answer. If the project failed, the bank would foreclose on Lake Briar. I would lose the building. They would walk away, and I would be left with nothing. "You leveraged my future," I said, realizing the enormity of it. "You risked my entire life on a condo project." "We are family," Marla snapped, finally losing her cool. "That is what families do. We leverage assets." "The property was sitting there doing nothing. You were doing nothing, just working that pathetic job and living like a pauper. I put the capital to work." "You put my capital to work," I shot back. "Without my consent. That isn't family. Marla, that is exploitation." Ronan stood up. He walked over to the fireplace and turned around, facing the table. The flames cast long, dancing shadows behind him. "I built this family on trust," Ronan said. "I thought I was building a dynasty. Instead, I built a nest of vipers." He looked at Dylan. "Dylan, did you sign the loan documents for the intake of funds?" "Yes," Dylan whispered. "Did you verify the source of funds?" Mom said. "Did you verify?" Ronan shouted. "No," Dylan cried. "I just signed I wanted to start building." "Then you are liable," Ronan said. "Callum, what is the exposure?" "If we go to the authorities," Callum said. "Dylan is looking at conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Marla is looking at grand larceny, forgery, and identity theft. The bank will call the loan immediately. The Aurora project will be seized. Dylan's assets will be frozen." Dylan sank back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He was crying now, not the polite, silent crying of a funeral, but the ugly, gasping sobs of a man who sees his life ending. "I can't go to jail," Dylan sobbed. "I can't. Grandfather, please, I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I said. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel inferior to my cousin. I didn't feel like the poor relation. I felt like the only adult in the room. "You were so desperate to be a big shot," I told him. "You were so desperate to play billionaire that you didn't care whose money you were spending. You looked at me at this table tonight and laughed at my job. You mocked me for being poor. And all the while, you were wearing a sweater bought with my money." Dylan looked up at me. His eyes were red, his face wet. Ivy, I swear. Save it, I said. I turned to Callum. There is more. Isn't there? I asked. You said the employment history was next. Yes, Callum said. The theft of the property was the crime of opportunity, but the isolation, the way they kept you poor so you wouldn't fight back, that required more than just forgery. That required sabotage. He closed the red file and placed his hand on the yellow one. This, Callum said, is why you never got a better job. The yellow folder lay on the table like a slab of radioactive material. Callum kept his hand on it, his fingers spread wide, waiting for the signal. But I did not look at the file. I looked at my grandfather. You said I was unstable, I said. My voice was steady, stripping away the frantic energy of the last few minutes. You said I was fragile. You said I could not handle the weight of the estate. Who told you that? Ronan sat slowly. He looked older than he had 10 minutes ago. The titan of industry, who could weather market crashes and hostile takeovers, looked physically diminished by the betrayal sitting at his own dinner table. They all did, Ronan said quietly. For years, every time I asked why you did not come to the summer gala, every time I asked why you did not reply to my letters, every time I suggested bringing you into the fold. He looked at my mother. Tessa told me you were battling severe depression. She said you were prone to manic episodes. She said if I put pressure on you, you would break. I turned to my mother. She was pressing a napkin to her lips, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal looking for a vent. Well, Tessa said, her voice muffled by the linen, you are emotional, Ivy. You cannot deny that. Look at you right now. You are shaking. I am shaking because I just found out my cousin stole my house, I said. That is a rational reaction to a crime. Mom, that is not mania. You have always been sensitive, Tessa insisted, lowering the napkin. She slipped back into that maddening, patronizing tone she had used on me my entire life, the tone that made me question my own reality. Ever since you were little, you feel things too deeply. We were just trying to manage your environment. We didn't want you to take on responsibilities that would crush you. Manage my environment, I repeated. Is that what you call it? I am your mother, Tessa said, her voice trembling with a performative martyrdom. I worry about you. I lose sleep worrying about you. When you get stressed, you shut down. We all know that. I was just trying to keep your life simple so you could cope. Sensitive, I said, testing the word. You use that word like a weapon. Being sensitive is not a medical diagnosis, and being sensitive is not a license for you to control every single aspect of my existence. I turned to Callum. Open the folder, I said. Callum flipped the cover. The narrative of Ivy's instability was not just shared at family dinners, Callum said. It was actively disseminated to third parties. He pulled out a stapled packet of emails. 3 years ago, Callum said. You applied for an apartment in Park Slope. It was a stretch for your budget, but you had the savings. You were rejected. The landlord cited character concerns regarding your reference check. I nodded. I remembered it vividly. I had cried for 2 days. I thought I had failed the interview. I thought I had come across as too eager or too poor. This is an email, Callum said. Sent from Tessa Parker's personal account to the leasing office of that building. It is dated 2 days after you submitted your application. He read from the paper. Dear Mr. Henderson, as Ivy's mother and primary guarantor, I feel it is my duty to inform you that while Ivy is a sweet girl, she is currently struggling with significant behavioral inconsistencies. We are concerned that the stress of a lease might trigger a relapse. We would hate for you to be in a position where you have to deal with a tenant who cannot maintain the property. The room went dead silent. I felt the blood drain from my face. You told my landlord I was crazy. I was protecting you, Tessa cried out. You couldn't afford that place. You would have been eating ramen for a year. I saved you from a bad financial decision. You didn't save me, I said. You humiliated me. You made a stranger think I was a liability. There is more, Callum interrupted. His voice was cold, cutting through my mother's hysterics. He pulled out another document. 2 years ago, the senior analyst position at Avalon Logistics. You made it to the final round. You told me earlier, Ivy, that the offer just evaporated. Yes, I said. They ghosted me. They didn't ghost you, Callum said. They received a phone call. He slid a call log across the table. It was a transcript from a corporate recording system, legally obtained during the audit. The call came from a number registered to Graham Parker. Callum said. My father's head snapped up. Now wait a minute. The caller identified himself as a former employer. Callum continued, ignoring him. He told the HR director that while Ivy Parker was bright, she had a history of litigation against employers and difficulty with authority figures. He suggested that hiring her would be a legal risk. I stared at my father, Graham Parker, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, the man who always told me to keep my head down and work hard. You slandered me, I whispered. To a hiring manager, Dad. That job would have doubled my salary. It would have given me health insurance. Graham's face was a mixture of guilt and defensive anger. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He looked at the wall, at the ceiling, at his hands. I didn't say that exactly, Graham muttered. I expressed concern. You were already so stressed at your current job. We didn't think you could handle the pressure of a senior role. We wanted you to stay where you were safe, where the expectations were lower. Safe? I asked. Or manageable? I stood up, pushing my chair back. The legs screeched against the floor. You sabotaged me, I said. You didn't just steal the money. You cut the ladder rungs every time I tried to climb out of the hole. I walked over to the table and picked up the papers. I looked at the dates. August 12th, the day I lost the apartment. November 3rd, the day the job offer vanished. March 15th, the day my credit score tanked because of an administrative error that I now realized was likely Marla interfering with the trust payments. It was a map of my failures, a timeline of every moment I had felt worthless, every moment I had felt like the universe was conspiring against me. I spent 3 years thinking I was broken, I said, my voice shaking. I went to therapy. I took medication I probably didn't need. I sat in a chair and told a therapist that I felt like I was sabotaging my own success. I thought it was my subconscious. I looked at Tessa. It wasn't my subconscious. It was my mother. Don't be dramatic, Tessa snapped, her defense mechanism shifting from pity to anger. We provided for you. We paid for your college. We let you live your little independent life. But you weren't ready for the real world. Ivy, you needed a safety net. I had a safety net. I screamed. I had a $3 million building. I had a grandfather who wanted to help me. You took the net away and then pushed me off the tightrope just to catch me and say, "See, you fell." Marla leaned forward. She had regained some of her composure. She saw an opening to shift the narrative back to competence. Let's be realistic. Ivy, Marla said, her voice smooth and condescending. Look at how you are reacting now. Look at the rage. If we had given you that property 3 years ago, what would you have done? You would have sold it. You would have squandered it on bad investments or some boy. You have no financial literacy. You would have ruined the asset. So you stole it to save it, I asked. I stewarded it, Marla corrected. I put it to work. The Aurora Complex is a visionary project. If you had the title, it would just be a dusty building in a dusty town earning peanuts. Peanuts, I said. $12,000 a month is peanuts to you. To me, it was freedom. You wouldn't know what to do with freedom, Marla said. You need structure. You need guidance. That is the lie you tell yourselves, I said. The realization hit me then. It was clarity, absolute and terrifying. I looked at the three of them, Marla, Tessa, Graham. They weren't afraid I would fail. They weren't afraid I would lose the money. You weren't afraid I would ruin the asset, I said softly. I looked directly at my mother. If I had that money, I wouldn't need to call you for rent assistance. If I had that job, I wouldn't need to come home for Thanksgiving just to get a decent meal. If I had my own life, I wouldn't need your approval. I slammed the file closed. You weren't afraid I would fail, I said. You were afraid I would succeed, because if I succeeded, I would leave. I would walk out that door and never look back, and you would lose your punching bag. You would lose your scapegoat. You would lose the one person in this family who makes you feel superior. Tessa's mouth opened, but she didn't speak. For the first time, she looked struck, not by an accusation of theft, but by the truth of her own pathology. "You kept me small," I said. "You kept me poor. You kept me scared, not because you loved me, but because you needed to control me." "That is not true," Graham shouted. "We love you. Everything we did was for family." "No," Ronan spoke. The single word cut through the air like a guillotine blade. Ronan had been silent for a long time. He had watched the evidence pile up, the deeds, the logs, the emails. He had watched his daughter admit to gaslighting her own child. He had watched his son-in-law admit to professional sabotage. He stood up from the head of the table. He did not look angry. He looked something far worse. He looked resolved. He walked over to where I was standing. He looked at me, really looked at me with a mixture of sorrow and respect. "They are right about one thing," Ronan said to me. "You are emotional. You are angry. And you should be." He turned to face the rest of the table. "I built this family like I built my company," Ronan said. "I thought hierarchy created order. I thought control ensured legacy. I see now that I created a system where the strong eat the weak." He looked at Tessa. "You didn't protect her," Ronan said. "You clipped her wings because you were afraid she would fly higher than you." He looked at Marla. "You didn't steward the asset. You coveted it." He looked at Graham. "And you? You are the worst of them, because you knew it was wrong. And you did it anyway because it was easier than standing up to your wife." Ronan placed a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy and warm. "I have spent the last hour wondering if I should forgive this," Ronan said. "I have been weighing the scandal, the shame, the damage to the Blackwood name if this goes public." The room held its breath. Marla leaned forward slightly, hope flickering in her eyes. She thought he was negotiating. She thought he was looking for a settlement. "But then I heard what you did to her mind," Ronan said. "I heard how you made her question her own sanity. Theft is a crime of greed, but that is a crime of malice." He looked at Callum. "Callum," Ronan said. "I am done listening." "What does that mean?" "Dad," Marla asked, her voice trembling. Ronan did not answer her. He looked at me. "I am not going to fix this for you. Ivy." Ronan said. My heart stopped. "What?" "I am not going to make it go away." Ronan said. "I am not going to pay off the debts and hush it up. That is what I would have done yesterday. That is what a patriarch does." He stepped back. "But you are not a child who needs protecting. You are the owner of the Lake Briar property. You are the victim of a crime." He gestured to the phone sitting next to Callum's elbow. "This is your play," Ronan said. "You have the evidence. You have the floor. What do you want to do?" I looked at the phone. Then I looked at my family. My mother was crying silently. My father was staring at his shoes. Dylan was shaking. Marla was glaring at me with pure hatred. They expected me to fold. They expected me to be the Ivy they had created, the soft, scared, overwhelmed girl who would do anything to keep the peace. But that girl didn't exist anymore. She had died the moment I saw my signature forged on a power of attorney. "I want the truth," I said. "All of it. We are not done." I turned to Callum. "You said there was a trust," I said. "A second layer? The canary clause." Marla's face went from angry to white. She knew. "We haven't discussed the Evelyn Blackwood trust yet," I said. "Have we, Aunt Marla?" Marla stood up. "That is irrelevant. That has nothing to do with this." "Sit down," Ronan barked. "Tell me about the trust," I said to Callum. Callum smiled. It was a small, sharp smile. "I think," Callum said, "that is the part that will hurt the most." Callum Reed placed a single black folder on the table. It was thinner than the others, bound in a matte material that seemed to absorb the candlelight rather than reflect it. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. If the previous files had been weapons, this one felt like the trigger for a nuclear device. Ronan Blackwood remained standing. He looked at the family gathered around the wreckage of our Thanksgiving dinner, the spilled wine, the cold turkey, the scattered deeds and bank statements. He looked like a man who had built a skyscraper only to discover termites in the foundation, and he had decided the only solution was to burn the building down. "You all made a critical error in judgment," Ronan said softly. His voice was devoid of the anger he had shown earlier. It was now terrifyingly clinical. You assumed that the property at Lake Briar was the inheritance. You assumed that because it was worth $3 million, it was the prize. He leaned forward, placing his knuckles on the table. Lake Briar was not the prize. It was the bait. The room went dead silent. Marla's eyes widened. Tessa stopped sniffling. Graham looked up from his shoes. I have spent 50 years in business. Ronan continued. I know how to protect assets from market volatility. I know how to protect them from hostile takeovers. And I knew that the biggest threat to Ivy's future was not the economy. It was her family. He gestured to the black folder. 3 years ago, on the same day I signed the deed for the Lake Briar property, I established a secondary trust, the Evelyn Blackwood Trust, named after your mother. Marla let out a sharp breath. Mom's trust. We thought that was dissolved years ago. You thought wrong, Ronan said. I recapitalized it. I placed the bulk of Ivy's intended inheritance inside it, stocks, bonds, and a significant portfolio of diversified assets. It is a blind trust, designed to activate only when Ivy demonstrated full financial independence and autonomy. I stared at him. You wanted me to be independent first. Yes, Ronan said, looking at me. I wanted you to prove you could stand on your own 2 feet. I wanted you to manage the Lake Briar property, learn the ropes. And once you had stabilized that asset, the main trust would unlock. It would have changed your life, Ivy. It would have given you freedom you cannot even imagine. He turned back to Marla and my parents. But I also know you people. I know that you, Marla, cannot resist an unguarded dollar. I know that you, Tessa, cannot resist controlling a narrative. So I inserted a clause into the Evelyn Blackwood Trust. I call it the Canary Clause. Callum opened the black folder. He did not pass it around. He read from it, his voice ringing with the finality of a judge passing a death sentence. The Canary Clause dictates that the Lake Briar property serves as a litmus test for the integrity of the family. Callum read, if the beneficiary, Ivy Parker, is prevented from accessing the property through coercion, fraud, or interference by any family member, or if the property is misappropriated, transferred, or encumbered by any family member, a specific protocol is immediately triggered. Callum looked up, his eyes locked on Marla. The protocol is total asset forfeiture and disinheritance. Marla dropped her napkin. It fluttered to the floor in slow motion. What? She whispered. The clause states, Callum continued, returning to the text, that any beneficiary of the primary Blackwood estate who is found to have interfered with the Evelyn Trust's test asset, the Lake Briar property, shall generally be removed from the primary estate. Furthermore, the Evelyn Trust is authorized to use its full liquidity to recover the test asset and seek maximum punitive damages against the interfering party. Ronan's voice cut in, sharp and hard. Do you understand what you have done? Marla, you stole a $3 million house to fund a condo project. In doing so, you triggered a clause that strips you of your $50 million share of my estate. Marla's face turned a color I had never seen on a human being. It was a gray, sickly paste. She tried to stand up, but her legs gave way, and she slumped back into her chair. You can't do that, she stammered. Dad, that is insane. It was a test. You set a trap for your own children. I set a security system, Ronan corrected. You chose to break in. He turned to Tessa and Graham. And you, Ronan said. You didn't steal the deed, but you hid the existence of the property. You intercepted the mail. You gaslit your daughter. Under the definition of the clause, that constitutes interference through coercion and fraud. Tessa let out a low wail. No, Dad. Please, we were protecting her. Stop saying that, Ronan shouted. The sound was so loud that the crystal chandelier above us seemed to vibrate. You were not protecting her, you were protecting your position. He walked around the table until he was standing directly behind Tessa's chair. You knew, Ronan said, his voice dripping with disdain. You knew that if Ivy got that property, she would have money. If she had money, she wouldn't need you. She wouldn't need to beg you for help. She wouldn't be the messy daughter you could complain about to your friends at the country club to make yourself look like a saint. You needed her broken so you could feel whole. Tessa put her head in her hands and sobbed. It was a raw, ugly sound. The sound of a truth finally being ripped out into the open. And now, Ronan said, because you wanted to keep her small, you have lost everything. The canary clause applies to you too. Tessa, you are out of the will. The table was silent except for Tessa's sobbing. I sat there, frozen. I felt like I was watching a demolition derby in slow motion. The scale of it was impossible to process. They hadn't just lost the money they stole from me. They had lost the fortune they had been waiting for their entire lives. This is a bluff, Marla said suddenly. Her voice was shaking, but there was a desperate edge to it. You wouldn't do it. You wouldn't cut us all off. You are just trying to scare us. Callum, Ronan said. Play the recording. Callum reached into his pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. He placed it on the table and pressed a button. The audio was clear. It was a phone call. I recognized the voices immediately. It was Marla and Tessa. Audio Marla's voice. Are you sure she doesn't know about the trust letters? Audio Tessa's voice. I burned them. Graham is nervous, but I told him it is for the best. If Ivy gets that kind of capital, she will move into the city. She will start thinking she is better than us. Audio Marla's voice. Good. Keep her dependent. It is easier to manage the assets if she is focused on surviving. If she is too busy worrying about rent, she won't ask questions about the Lakebriar revenue. Audio Tessa's voice. Exactly. She is safer this way. We are the adults. We know what is best. Callum pressed the button again, and the recording stopped. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who had held me when I cried over lost jobs. The woman who had told me I was just too sensitive for the world. You burned them, I said. My voice was flat. I didn't have any tears left. You burned my grandfather's letters. Tessa looked up. Her eyes were red and swollen. She looked like a ghost. Ivy, don't, I said. Just don't. Marla was staring at the recorder as if it were a venomous snake. The recording had destroyed her last line of defense. It wasn't mismanagement. It wasn't an accident. It was a conspiracy. That recording, Callum noted, was automatically archived on the family server because you were using company phones. We found it during the audit this afternoon. Ronan looked at Marla. Easier to manage, he repeated. That is what my granddaughter is to you, inventory to be managed. Marla did not answer. Then, a sudden, frantic noise broke the tension. It was Dylan. He was hyperventilating. He was clutching his chest, his face pale. He looked at Callum, then at Ronan. Wait, Dylan gasped. Wait a second. If the trust activates, if it claws back the assets. He looked at Callum with wild eyes. What happens to the loan? The $1.5 million for the Aurora complex? Callum looked at Dylan with zero sympathy. The Evelyn Blackwood Trust is now the legal owner of the Lakebriar property, Callum explained. The trust did not authorize that mortgage. Therefore, the trust will file an immediate motion to invalidate the lien as fraudulent. What does that mean? Dylan shrieked. It means the bank that lent you the money is going to realize their collateral has evaporated, Callum said. They will issue an immediate demand for repayment of the full principal. $1.5 million, due immediately. I spent it, Dylan yelled. It is in the ground. It is in concrete and steel. I can't pay it back. Then you are insolvent, Callum said calmly. And since you signed the loan documents knowing the collateral was questionable, the bank will likely sue you personally for fraud. And since the trust is also filing a civil suit against Juniper Vale Holdings to recover the lost rent, you are fighting a war on two fronts. Dylan turned to his mother. You said it was safe. You said it was free money. You destroyed my life. I was trying to help you, Marla screamed back at him. I was trying to build you a legacy since you couldn't build one yourself. Enough, Ronan roared. He slammed his hand on the table one final time. The cutlery rattled. The game is over, Ronan said. The board is cleared. He looked at me. Ivy, he said. Do you see it now? I looked at the chaos around me. I saw my cousin sweating through his expensive sweater. I saw my aunt shaking with the realization that she was no longer an heiress. I saw my parents shrinking into their chairs. stripped of their moral high ground. Yes, I said. I see it. This wasn't just about money, Ronan said. It was about capacity. They wanted to take away your capacity to choose. They wanted you to be a passenger in your own life so they could drive the car. He walked back to the head of the table but did not sit down. He stood there, tall and unyielding, the patriarch who had finally had enough. I am issuing an order, Ronan said. Effective immediately. He looked at everyone at the table except me. From this moment forward, no one in this room is to speak to Ivy Parker. You will not call her. You will not text her. You will not email her. You will not show up at her apartment. Dad, you can't be serious, Graham pleaded. She is our daughter. You lost the right to that title when you burned my letters, Ronan said coldly. If you want to communicate with Ivy, you will do so through Callum Reed, and I warn you, if you try to approach her, if you try to guilt her, if you try to manipulate her with your "we are family" nonsense, I will not just disinherit you, I will spend every remaining dollar I have ensuring you are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. He turned to Callum. Callum, give them the non-disclosure agreements. If they sign them, I might let them keep the cars they drove here in. If they don't, we seize everything by morning. Callum opened his briefcase one last time and pulled out a stack of papers. He began sliding them across the table to Marla, Dylan, Tessa, and Graham. I watched them. They looked at the papers with trembling hands. They were defeated, completely and utterly defeated. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It was lighter than that. It was the feeling of a heavy weight, one I hadn't realized I was carrying, suddenly being lifted off my shoulders, the weight of their expectations, the weight of their judgment, the weight of their control. It was gone. Ronan walked over to me. He extended his hand. Come on, Ivy, he said. We have a lot of work to do, and I think we have both lost our appetite for turkey. I stood up. I didn't look at my mother. I didn't look at my father. I took my grandfather's hand. It was rough and warm. Yes, I said. I think we have. As we walked toward the door, leaving the ruins of the Blackwood family dinner behind us, I realized something. I wasn't just walking out of a dining room. I was walking out of the cage. And for the first time in 33 years, I had the key. The silence that followed Ronan's ultimatum was not peaceful. It was the pressurized silence of a submarine hull groaning before it implodes. I stood there, my hand in my grandfather's, feeling the warmth of his palm anchoring me to a new reality, but I could not leave yet, not while the air in the room was still thick with their lies. I needed to see them break. I needed to see the machinery of their deception dismantled, gear by grinding gear. The sound of paper sliding across mahogany seemed to trigger a chemical reaction in my father. Graham looked at the non-disclosure agreement Callum had pushed toward him, and then he looked at Marla. The panic in his eyes hardened into something ugly. "This is not my fault," Graham blurted out. His voice was shrill, cracking in a way that made him sound like a teenager caught with a stolen car. "I didn't set up the LLC. I didn't find the lawyer. That was Marla. Marla told me it was a standard asset protection strategy." Marla's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Excuse me, you are the one who said we needed liquidity for the Hamptons renovation. You came to me complaining that your bonus was smaller than expected. You asked if there was any wiggle room in the family accounts." "I asked for a loan," Graham shouted, pointing a shaking finger at her. "I didn't ask you to steal a building. You said you had handled it. You said you were moving Ivy's asset into a better vehicle. You used the word optimization. And you believed me because it was convenient," Marla spat back. "Don't play the innocent victim. Graham, you signed the checks. You drove the new Porsche. You ate the dinners. You didn't ask where the money came from because you liked the lifestyle it bought you." "Tessa," Graham pivoted to my mother, desperate for an ally. Tell them I asked you if it was legal. You said you checked with the estate planners. You said Dad would want us to handle it this way." My mother, who had been weeping into her hands, looked up. Her face was a ruin of smeared mascara and blotchy red skin, but the sorrow vanished the moment the blame touched her, replaced by a defensive snarl. "Don't you dare put this on me," Tessa hissed. "I didn't sign the loan documents. I didn't authorize the construction. I just wanted to protect Ivy from the stress. Oh, stop it with the stress, Marla screamed. We all know why you did it. Tessa, you didn't want Ivy to have money because if she had money, she wouldn't need you to rescue her anymore. The accusation hung in the air, vibrating. I let go of Ronan's hand. I took a step back toward the table. The old Ivy, the one who apologized for taking up space, would have walked away. She would have let them scream it out and then quietly accepted their apologies 6 months later. But that Ivy was gone. She had been sold for $1. Stop, I said. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. The authority in my voice surprised even me. It was cold, clear, and absolute. They all stopped talking and looked at me. I looked at my father. You said you just signed the papers, I said. You said you thought it was optimization. Yes. Graham nodded frantically, seeing a lifeline. Exactly, Ivy. I am not a lawyer. I trust your aunt. I trust your mother. They put papers in front of me, and I signed them. I was just doing what I was told. You are 55 years old, I said. You have been a corporate vice president for 20 years. Are you telling me that you signed a document transferring a multi-million-dollar property for $1, and you didn't think to ask a question? I didn't read the fine print, Graham stammered. It wasn't fine print, I said. It was the title of the deed. You didn't read it because you didn't want to know. You wanted the plausible deniability. I turned to Callum. Is ignorance a defense? I asked. Callum looked at Graham with eyes like flint. In a court of law. Sometimes, in a fiduciary capacity, never, Mr. Parker had a duty of care. By signing blindly, he was grossly negligent. Callum paused, then delivered the strike. Trust does not absolve responsibility. Graham, it just makes the betrayal more expensive. Graham slumped in his chair. The excuse had evaporated. He was just a man who had sold his daughter out for a quiet life and a renovated kitchen. I turned my gaze to my mother. She was refusing to look at me. She was picking at a loose thread on the tablecloth, her fingers working furiously. Marla is right, isn't she? I asked softly. Tessa froze. It wasn't about the money for you, I said. Dad wanted the money, Marla wanted the capital, Dylan wanted the fame, but you wanted the tragedy. Tessa looked up. Her eyes were wet, but hard. I don't know what you are talking about. Yes, you do, I said. For 3 years, whenever I called you crying because I couldn't pay a bill, you didn't offer to help. You offered to listen. You would stay on the phone with me for hours, telling me how hard the world is, how unfair it is, how I am just too soft for it. I walked closer to her. You loved those phone calls, I said. You loved being the strong, stable mother comforting her disaster of a daughter. It made you feel important. It made you feel necessary. I am your mother, Tessa cried. I am necessary. Not if I am successful, I said. If I had that trust fund, if I had that property, I would have been fine. I would have been traveling. I would have been building a career. I wouldn't have been calling you in tears, and you couldn't stand that thought. I remembered the Thanksgiving 3 years ago. I had just gotten a promotion, a small one, but I was proud. I told the table, and Tessa had immediately pivoted the conversation to how tired I looked, how I was probably working too hard, how I shouldn't burn out. She had extinguished my light before it could even flicker. You used me as a shield, I said, the realization settling in my gut like lead. You told the rest of the family I was unstable so that you could be the saint who takes care of me. I wasn't a person to you. I was a prop in your performance of motherhood. Tessa's face crumpled. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. The truth was written in every intercepted letter, in every sabotage email, in every whispered conversation she had held with Marla. I just wanted you close, she whispered. The admission was terrifying in its selfishness. You didn't want me close, I said. You wanted me clipped. I turned away from her. I couldn't look at her anymore. The disgust was too strong. I looked at Ronan. He was watching me. He wasn't interfering. He was letting me conduct the autopsy of my own childhood. The letters, I said to him. You said you wrote every month. I did, Ronan said. Why? I asked. If you gave me the property, why write? Why not just send a check? Ronan reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a single, folded piece of paper. It wasn't an official document. It was a letter, handwritten on cream-colored stationery. I didn't want to give you money, Ronan said. Money is easy. Money is dangerous. I wanted to give you an education. He unfolded the paper. This is the copy of the first letter I sent you, Ronan said. I kept carbon copies of all of them. He handed it to me. I took it. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a sudden, overwhelming grief for the relationship I had been denied. I read the first paragraph. My dearest Ivy, enclosed is the deed to 42 Main Street. It is not a gift to be spent, but a responsibility to be mastered. In this letter, I have outlined the basics of commercial yield and how to read a tenant ledger. I want you to understand that ownership is not about power, it is about stewardship. Call me when you have read it. We can discuss the property tax implications over coffee. I looked up at him. You were trying to teach me. I wanted to mentor you, Ronan said softly. I saw how smart you were. I saw how you observed things. I didn't want you to just be a rich girl. I wanted you to be a force. I sent you market analyses. I sent you articles on urban development. I sent you questions to make you think. He looked at the table, his expression hardening. I thought you were ignoring me. I thought you were lazy. I thought you didn't care about my advice or my time. I never got them, I whispered. I would have read every word. I would have studied them like textbooks. I know that now, Ronan said. He turned to the group. Who? He asked. Just one word. We all knew what he meant. Who physically took the letters, who stood by the mailbox, who held the future in their hands and threw it in the trash. Tessa looked at Graham. Graham looked at Marla. It wasn't just one person, Graham said, his voice barely audible. It was a system. Explain, Callum commanded. Tessa has the key to Ivy's old mailbox in the city, Graham confessed. She never gave it back after college. She would go by once a week to check on things. She brought the mail to the house. He swallowed hard. She would sort it on the kitchen island. She put the bills in one pile for Ivy. She put the letters from Ronan in another pile. And then, I asked, Marla would come over, Graham continued. They would go through the letters. Marla wanted to see if there were checks. When they saw it was just advice, just grandfather talk, they shredded them. Shredded, I repeated. They were afraid, Graham said. They were afraid that if you read the letters, you would realize Ronan respected you. And if you realized he respected you, you would go to him. And if you went to him, you would find out about the property. It was a perfect circle of malice. They didn't just steal the money. They intercepted the mentorship. They kept me ignorant so they could keep me poor. And they kept me poor so they could keep me quiet. You stole my grandfather, I said. The words landed harder than the accusation of theft. Money can be repaid. Houses can be bought back. But 3 years of time, 3 years of connection, 3 years of learning from a man who was now 80 years old, that was gone forever. I looked at the fireplace. I imagined the letters burning. I imagined the wisdom, the care, the love written in ink, curling into ash. I felt a coldness settle over me. It was the end of the shock and the beginning of the resolve. I am done asking questions, I said. I looked at the clock on the mantelpiece. It was almost 9 o'clock. Callum, I said, do you have the keys? Callum looked at me, intrigued. The keys to what? To the house, I said. To the office. To wherever they kept the records. I turned to my parents. You said you kept records, I said to Graham. You said there were ledgers. You said there were files. They are in the home office, Graham said weaky. In the safe. And the originals, I asked. The original deeds, the original letters you didn't burn, the ones you kept for insurance. Graham blanched. How did you know? Because you are cowards, I said. And cowards always keep insurance. You kept them to blackmail Marla if she ever cut you out. I didn't wait for his confirmation. I knew I was right. I walked back to the chair where I had left my purse. I picked it up. I put the strap over my shoulder. I am not waiting for the audit, I said. I am not waiting for Monday morning. I looked at Ronan. I want to go to their house, I said. I want to open the safe. I want to see the physical proof of what they did to me. I want to hold it in my hands." Ronan nodded. A grim smile touched his lips. "Then let's go." "You can't just go to our house," Tessa shrieked. "It is late. We are tired." "I don't care," I said. I stood tall. For the first time in my life, I wasn't shrinking to fit the room, I was expanding to fill it. "I am the owner of the Lake Briar property," I said, my voice ringing out. "I am the beneficiary of the Evelyn Blackwood Trust, and I am the plaintiff in the lawsuit that is going to destroy you." I walked to the door. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look back. "I want to see the truth," I said to the room at large. "All of it, tonight?" Callum picked up his briefcase. Ronan buttoned his coat, and we walked out into the cold November night, leaving my family sitting in the wreckage of their own greed, while I went to reclaim the life they had tried to burn. We had almost made it to the door. The coat check attendant was holding Ronan's heavy wool overcoat, and the cold air of the foyer was beckoning like a promise of freedom. But Callum Reed stopped us. He did not step in front of us physically. He simply spoke a sentence that acted like a lasso, pulling us back into the gravity of the room we were trying to escape. "We cannot leave yet," Callum said, placing his briefcase on a side table near the entrance. "If we walk out that door without filing the injunctions, Marla will transfer the liquid assets out of the accounts before we reach the highway." I stopped. I turned back to look at the dining room. My family was still there, frozen in a tableau of misery. Marla was furiously typing on her phone. Tessa was staring at a blank wall. Dylan was holding his head in his hands. Ronan turned around slowly. "You have the papers prepared." "I have a draft of an emergency ex parte motion for a temporary restraining order on all assets held by Juniper Vale Holdings and its principals," Callum said. He clicked a pen, a sharp, aggressive sound. "I also have a petition for the immediate appointment of a forensic receiver. Once you sign this, I can file it electronically with the emergency duty judge. It will freeze everything: their bank accounts, the construction loans, the personal investment portfolios. They will not be able to buy a pack of gum, let alone wire funds offshore." Ronan walked back to the table. He did not sit down. He did not look at his daughter or his grandchildren. He simply held out his hand for the pen. "Do it," Ronan said. Marla looked up, her face pale. She saw the document. She saw the pen. And for the first time, she realized that this was not a scolding. This was an execution. "Dad, wait," Marla pleaded, standing up so fast her chair tipped over. "You cannot freeze my personal accounts. I have mortgage payments. I have tuition for the twins. You will bankrupt me." "You bankrupted yourself when you stole from my granddaughter," Ronan said. He signed his name with a flourish. The scratch of the nib on the paper was loud in the silent room. "I am merely formalizing the reality you created." He handed the document back to Callum. "File it," Ronan commanded, "and request an expedited audit of the last 5 years." "Done," Callum said. He took a photo of the signature page with his phone and began tapping the screen, initiating the digital filing process that would lock my family out of their own lives. Marla saw the wall coming down. She changed tactics instantly. The arrogance vanished, replaced by a frantic, salesman-like desperation. She walked around the table, approaching me, but stopping short when Callum stepped between us. "Ivy," Marla said, her voice trembling with forced warmth, "listen to me. We can fix this right now. Tonight, I will sign the deed back to you. I will transfer the ownership of Juniper Vale to you. You get the building. You get the back rent. You get the equity. All of it. Immediately." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document. "I have a transfer agreement right here," she said. "I prepared it just in case things got complicated. If you sign this waiver of liability, I will give you everything back. No lawyers, no courts, no scandal." I looked at the paper in her hand. It was a settlement agreement. It promised the return of the property in exchange for a complete release of all legal claims against Marla and her associates. For a second, the old Ivy, the one who hated conflict, the one who just wanted everyone to get along, tempted me. It would be over. I would have my house. I would have $3 million. I could walk away. But then I looked at Callum. He was watching me, waiting to see if I had learned anything. It is a trap, isn't it? I asked him. It is a poison pill. Callum confirmed without looking at Marla. If you sign that waiver, you are accepting the property as is. That means you also accept the $1.5 million debt attached to it. Marla walks away clean, and you inherit a building that is about to be foreclosed on by the bank because the mortgage is in default. You would be assuming her crime as your debt. I looked back at Marla. The hope in her eyes died, replaced by a cold, venomous hatred. You wanted me to sign my own death warrant, I said. You wanted me to take the fall for your loan. It was your only chance to get the house back without a fight. Marla snapped. You are ungrateful. I am offering you a solution. You are offering me a noose, I said. Keep your paper, Marla. We are doing this the hard way. I turned to leave again, but a hand grabbed my elbow. It was Dylan. My cousin looked like he had aged 10 years in the last hour. His face was blotchy, his eyes red. He wasn't looking at me with the disdain he usually had. He looked terrified. Ivy, please, he whispered. Can I talk to you? Just for a second, alone. Ronan stepped forward, his expression darkening, but I held up a hand. It is okay, I said to my grandfather. 2 minutes. I walked Dylan to the far corner of the room, near the heavy velvet curtains. He smelled like fear and expensive cologne. I am going to jail. Aren't I? Dylan asked. His voice was shaking so hard the words barely came out. If you knew the money was stolen, yes, I said. Wire fraud is serious. Dylan, I swear I didn't know it was yours, Dylan said, tears spilling over. Mom told me you were sick. She told me the family had to manage your assets because you were having episodes. She said you were delusional. She said you thought people were following you. I stared at him. Delusional. She told me you had a breakdown 3 years ago, Dylan confessed. She said you were legally incapacitated, but they were keeping it quiet to protect your reputation. So when she said she was using family resources to fund the Aurora complex, I thought it was unused money that you couldn't touch anyway because you were, crazy, I supplied. Yeah, Dylan whispered. I thought I was helping. Mom said if we made a profit on the condos, we could put the money back into your trust before you got better. She made it sound like we were doing you a favor. I looked at him. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to see him as the villain. But as I looked at his shaking hands, I realized he was just another product of the Blackwood lie machine. He was arrogant and lazy, yes, but he had been fed a narrative just like I had. They had painted me as a mad woman so that he wouldn't feel guilty about spending my money. You believed her because it was easy, I said. You believed her because it gave you a check for $1.5 million. Dylan nodded shamefully. I know, I was stupid. But Ivy, I don't want to go to prison. I have a fiancé. I have a life. Then you need to choose, I said coldly. Right now? Choose what? Between your mother and your freedom, I said. If you want me to ask Ronan to show mercy, if you want the trust to treat you as a witness instead of a co-conspirator, you have to give me everything. Everything. The loan documents. I listed. The emails where Marla told you where the money came from. The texts where she talked about my breakdown. I want it all. I want you to testify that she lied to you. Dylan looked across the room at his mother. Marla was still arguing with Callum. Her face twisted in anger. She looked vicious. She looked like someone who would throw her own son under the bus to save her skin. Dylan took a deep breath. Okay, I have the files on my laptop. I have the emails archived. Good, I said. Don't delete a single byte. If you delete anything, the deal is off. I walked back to the center of the room. Dylan followed me, looking like a beaten dog, but a dog that had found a new master. We are adding a condition to the audit, I told Callum. Dylan is going to cooperate. He is turning over his communications with Marla. Marla gasped. Dylan, you wouldn't... Dylan didn't look at her. He looked at the floor. I am sorry, Mom. I can't go to jail for your condos. Callum nodded, making a note on his pad. A wise choice, Mr. Vane. Then, Callum looked at me with a somber expression. There is one more thing, Callum said. Before we go to your parents' house to retrieve the physical records, we need to address the gap. The gap? I asked. You mentioned earlier, Callum said, that you always seem to be short just a few $100s. You mentioned that you couldn't afford antibiotics. You couldn't afford brake pads. Yes, I said. I am bad with money. I know that. You are not bad with money, Callum corrected firmly. You are being siphoned. He opened the yellow file again. In addition to the property, Ronan set up a small brokerage account for you. It was not part of the trust. It was a direct gift, meant to provide liquidity for emergencies. It contains about $50,000 in index funds. I never knew about that, I said. You weren't supposed to, Callum said. It was managed by your father, under the guise of financial oversight. Callum pulled out a spreadsheet that showed a list of monthly transactions. Look at the withdrawals, Callum said. I looked. January 15th. Withdrawal, $350. February 14th. Withdrawal, $400. March 12th. Withdrawal, $280. The list went on. Every single month, small amounts, never enough to trigger a major fraud alert, never enough to drain the account dry, just enough to bleed it. This is the cruelty of the design, Callum said quietly. They didn't want you to starve. Ivy, if you starved, you would become a public embarrassment. They wanted you to struggle. He pointed to the dates. They calculated your take-home pay from your job. They knew exactly what your rent was. They knew what your student loan payments were, and they withdrew just enough from this account, which they were claiming to manage for you to ensure that you never had a surplus. I felt the air leave my lungs. They engineered my poverty, I whispered. Yes, Callum said. If you had an extra $400 a month, you might have saved up for a deposit on a better apartment. You might have taken a night class. You might have felt secure. He looked at Graham. My father was studying the ceiling, his face gray. They needed you to be desperate, Callum said. Desperate people don't ask questions about trusts. Desperate people don't hire lawyers. Desperate people call their mothers crying, asking for advice, reinforcing the power dynamic. I thought about the antibiotics again. I thought about the pain in my throat. I thought about the shame I felt standing at the pharmacy counter, telling the pharmacist I couldn't afford the medicine. I had walked out of that store feeling like a failure. I had hated myself. And all the while, there was $50,000 sitting in an account with my name on it, and my father was skimming off the top to keep me on my knees. I looked at Graham. You let me be in pain, I said. My voice broke. You knew I was sick. I told you, and you had access to this account. You could have transferred $50 to help me. Instead, you took money out. It wasn't we were saving it for you, Graham mumbled incoherently. We were investing it in the family pool. This is not a family, Ronan said. His voice came from behind me, low and dangerous. This is a model of control, Ronan said. It is a system designed to break a human being's spirit. I have seen hostile takeovers more humane than this. Ronan looked at the group with eyes that were no longer family eyes. They were the eyes of a man looking at a disease. I am done with the why, Ronan said. I only care about the how and the how much. He turned to Callum. Seize the devices, Ronan ordered. Now, Callum stepped forward. He held out a plastic evidence bag he had retrieved from his briefcase. I need all mobile phones, laptops, and tablets placed in this bag immediately, Callum announced. This is a preservation order. If you refuse, or if you attempt to delete data, it will be considered spoliation of evidence in the civil suit and obstruction of justice in the criminal referral. He stood in front of Marla first. Marla glared at him, then slowly, resentfully, dropped her iPhone into the bag. He moved to Dylan. Dylan handed over his phone and his laptop bag without hesitation, eager to please his new prosecutors. Then Callum moved to my parents. Graham handed over his phone with a shaking hand. He looked relieved to be rid of it, as if the device itself was radioactive. But Tessa did not move. She was clutching her purse to her chest with both arms. Her knuckles were white. Her eyes were wide and darting, filled with a primal, terrified panic. No, Tessa whispered. Mrs. Parker, Callum said, his voice dropping an octave. Hand over the phone. You can't have it, Tessa said, her voice rising to a shriek. It is private. I have personal things on there, photos, messages. We will filter for privilege, Callum said, but we need the device. No, Tessa yelled. She stood up and backed away, knocking her chair over. You are not looking at my messages. You are not looking at my notes. I looked at my mother. I had seen her angry. I had seen her manipulative. I had seen her drunk, but I had never seen her like this. She wasn't just afraid of the fraud being discovered. We already knew about the fraud. She was afraid of something else. What is on the phone, Mom? I asked, stepping toward her. Nothing, she screamed. Just leave me alone. If it is just the letters you burned, we know about that, I said. If it is the emails to the landlords, we know about that. What else is there? Tessa looked at me, and her eyes were filled with a horror that chilled me to the bone. It was the look of someone who had buried a body and was watching the rain wash away the dirt. Graham, tell them to stop, Tessa pleaded. But Graham didn't move. He was looking at his wife with a dawning realization. Tessa, Graham said slowly, give him the phone. I can't, she sobbed. Callum didn't wait. He signaled to the security guard who had been standing silently by the front door, a man I hadn't even noticed until now. The guard stepped forward. Mrs. Parker, the guard said gently but firmly. Please. Tessa looked at the guard, then at Ronan, then at me. She realized there was no exit, with a wail of despair that sounded more animal than human. She threw her purse onto the table. It slid across the mahogany and hit the centerpiece with a crash. Callum opened the purse and extracted the phone. He dropped it into the evidence bag and sealed it. Thank you, Callum said. He turned to me. Now, Callum said, let's go to your childhood home and see what else they have been hiding. I looked at the bag of phones. I looked at my mother, who was now sobbing uncontrollably into her hands, and I knew, with a sickening certainty, that the money was just the tip of the iceberg. The real secrets, the ones that would explain why they hated me enough to do this, were locked in that bag. Let's go, I said. We walked out into the night, the cold air hitting my face like a slap, waking me up from the nightmare of my past and pushing me into the brutal reality of my future. The drive to my parents' house was a blur of passing streetlights and suffocating silence. I sat in the back of Callum's sedan, clutching the evidence bag containing the phones as if it were a bomb that might detonate at any moment. Ronan sat beside me, looking out the window, his profile etched in stone. He did not speak. He did not offer empty platitudes. He respected me enough to let me sit in the anger. When we pulled into the driveway of the house I had grown up in, it felt like arriving at a stranger's home. The porch light was off. The windows were dark. It looked like a normal suburban house in Connecticut, the kind of place where happy families lived, where mothers baked cookies and fathers taught their sons to play catch. It was a facade. It was a stage set constructed to hide a labor camp. We did not knock. I used the key I had taken from my father's keychain. The house smelled of lemon polish and stale potpourri. It was the smell of my childhood, a scent that used to make me feel safe but now made my stomach turn. We could hear the others pulling into the driveway behind us, Marla, Dylan, and my parents, escorted by the security detail Ronan had summoned. They would be corralled in the living room, but I wasn't going to the living room. Upstairs, I said to Callum. The office is on the second floor. Lead the way, Callum said. We walked up the carpeted stairs. I passed my old bedroom, the door slightly ajar, revealing the twin bed where I had spent nights crying into my pillow, wondering why I wasn't good enough, why I couldn't handle the world like everyone else. I didn't stop. I walked to the end of the hall, to a heavy oak door that had always been kept shut. My father called this room the archive. Growing up, I was told never to go in there. It is a mess, Ivy, my mother would say. It is full of old tax papers and dust. You will just sneeze. It is not safe for you to be rummaging around in there. You might lose something important. I reached for the knob. It was locked. I looked at the keychain in my hand. There was a small brass key that looked like it belonged to a diary. I tried it. The lock tumbled with a smooth, satisfying click. I pushed the door open and flipped the light switch. It wasn't a mess. It was immaculate. The room was lined with filing cabinets and bookshelves, organized with a precision that bordered on obsessive. There was no dust. There were no piles of loose paper. It was a command center. They told me this room was a disaster zone, I whispered, stepping inside. They told me I would lose things if I came in here. People who hide things often project their own chaos onto others, Callum observed, stepping in behind me. Where is the safe? Behind the painting, I said, pointing to a generic landscape of a lighthouse on the far wall. Cliché, I know. Callum moved the painting. There was a wall safe. He looked at the keypad. Do we have the code? My father's birthday, I said. He is not a creative man. Callum punched in the numbers. 1968. The light turned green. He pulled the heavy steel door open. I expected to see cash. I expected to see jewelry. But the safe was filled with something far more valuable to my parents. It was filled with me. There were stacks of envelopes, bundled with rubber bands. There were thick manila folders labeled with my name. There was a box, an old shoebox, sealed with packing tape. I reached for the box first. I ripped the tape off, the sound tearing through the quiet room. I lifted the lid. The air left my lungs. It was a graveyard of unread words, dozens of envelopes, all addressed to me. Ivy Parker. The handwriting on them was familiar. It was the sharp, angular script of my grandfather. The letters, I said, my voice trembling. They didn't burn them. Hoarders rarely destroy the things they steal, Callum said softly. They keep them as trophies, or leverage. I picked up one of the envelopes. It was dated 3 years ago. The postmark was from the day after I had moved into my first apartment. I picked up another. It was from the week I had called my mother, sobbing because I had been fired from a barista job. I opened it. Dear Ivy, I saw an article today about emerging markets in Southeast Asia. It reminded me of your senior thesis. I think you have a mind for macroeconomics. If you are interested, I would love to hear your thoughts on the attached report. Also, enclosed is a check for $500. Buy yourself a decent desk chair. Your back will thank you later. I stared at the paper. There was no check in the envelope, just the letter. They took the checks, I said, and they hid the words. But it wasn't just Ronan's letters. Digging deeper into the box, I found other things, official-looking envelopes with plastic windows. I pulled one out. It was from a bank. Final notice, insufficient funds. I pulled out another. It was from the IRS. Notice of tax liability. They were intercepting my financial mail, I realized. All those times I got hit with late fees, all those times my credit score dropped and I didn't know why. They were catching the warnings, Callum said, reading over my shoulder. They let you hit the wall, but they hid the signs that the wall was coming. That is how they kept you confused. You can't fix a problem if you don't know it exists. I put the letters down. My hands were shaking with a cold, hard rage. I looked back at the safe. There was a black notebook sitting on the bottom shelf. It looked like a ledger. I pulled it out. It was my mother's handwriting. It wasn't a financial ledger. It was a calendar. I opened it to a random page. October. 2 years ago. October 4th. Emailed landlord at West Village regarding Ivy's application. Used the concern for mental health template. Confirmed rejection. October 10th. Called Graham's friend at the recruitment agency. Flagged Ivy as high maintenance and litigious. October 15th, Ivy called crying about the apartment rejection. Spent 40 minutes calming her down. Suggested she stay in Queens. She sounded very grateful. I felt sick, physically sick. I had to lean against the desk to keep from falling. It is a schedule, I whispered. She scheduled my failures. I turned the pages. It was all there. Every job interview I lost. Every apartment I was denied. Every time I had a glimmer of hope, there was an entry in this book extinguishing it, and followed always by a note about how she had comforted me. She sounded grateful. That was the line that broke me. She didn't just want to ruin me. She wanted me to thank her for it. This is not just control, Callum said, his voice grim. This is pathology. This is Munchausen by proxy. But financial. She keeps you sick, so she can be the nurse. I was about to close the book, to throw it across the room, when something fell out from the back pocket of the notebook. It was an envelope, but it wasn't from Ronan, and it wasn't from a bank. It was made of heavy, cream-colored paper. It smelled faintly of lavender and old dust. The handwriting on the front was shaky, spider-like, but elegant. To my granddaughter, Ivy. To be opened only when she takes ownership of Lake Briar. Grandmother, I whispered. My grandmother, Evelyn Blackwood, had died 4 years ago. She was the only person in the family who had ever just held my hand without asking for anything. I looked at Callum. She wrote this before she died. Open it, Callum said. I broke the wax seal. My fingers felt numb. I unfolded the letter. The date at the top was 2 weeks before her death. My darling Ivy, if you are reading this, it means Ronan has finally given you the building. Good. He is a stubborn man, but he sees you. He sees the steel in your spine, even if you don't see it yet. I made him promise to give you Lake Briar, not just because it is a good asset, but because it is the keeper of secrets, and I need you to be the one to hold the key. Your mother and your aunt think I didn't know. They think I was just a senile old woman staring at the garden, but I knew, 20 years ago, when the original trust was restructured. There was a gap, a significant one. $2 million went missing from the operating fund. I stopped reading. I looked up at Callum. $2 million. Keep reading, Callum urged. Graham and Marla covered it up. They cooked the books. They moved numbers around between the shell companies until the deficit looked like a tax write-off. They thought they were clever. They did it to cover Graham's gambling debts and Marla's failed fashion line. I didn't tell Ronan. It would have broken his heart, and he would have sent them to prison. I chose peace over justice. It was a mistake, but the evidence of that old crime is buried in the historical ledgers of the Lake Briar property. That building was the washing machine they used to clean the money. If anyone else got that property, anyone who actually looked at the history, they would see the pattern. They would see the theft. They are terrified of you having that house, Ivy, not because they think you are weak, but because they know you are honest. If you saw the books, you would ask questions, and if you asked questions, their house of cards would fall. Don't let them scare you. You are the only one clean enough to hold the truth. Love, Grandma. I lowered the letter. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. It wasn't just about controlling me, I said. My voice was hollow. It wasn't just about keeping me as a pet. No, Callum said. He looked at the letter, his lawyer's mind already categorizing the crime. They weren't afraid you would fail, Ivy. They were afraid you would audit. They stole $2 million 20 years ago, I said. And they have been suppressing me, gaslighting me, destroying my life for 3 years, just to keep me from looking at a ledger that would send them to jail. I looked at the notebook of sabotage. I looked at the unread letters from Ronan. It all made sense. The desperation, the fake concern, the way they panicked when the briefcase was opened. They weren't protecting a nest egg. They were protecting a crime scene. And I was the detective they had tried to blind. From downstairs, a noise erupted. It started as a murmur and quickly escalated into a shout. You said you burned it. That was Marla's voice, screeching. I couldn't, Tessa screamed back. I needed leverage against you. You were taking more than your share. You idiot, Marla yelled. You kept the evidence. You kept a diary. Ronan, make them stop. That was Graham, sounding like a man drowning. I will not, Ronan's voice boomed up the stairs. I want to hear it. Confess. Who blocked the letters? Who devised the plan? It was her idea, Tessa shouted. Marla said if Ivy got the house, she would find the 1998 washing scheme. She said we had to keep Ivy incompetent so Ronan wouldn't trust her with the books. Liar, Marla shrieked. You wanted to keep her close because you are a narcissist. You did it for the attention. The cover-up was just a bonus. I stood there, listening to them tear each other apart. The monsters under my bed weren't monsters. They were just greedy, frightened criminals who had sacrificed their own flesh and blood to save their skins. I picked up the shoebox. I put the notebook inside. I put Evelyn's letter on top. Are you ready? Callum asked. I looked at him. I felt a strange sense of calm. The confusion was gone. The hurt was gone. All that was left was the cold. hard clarity of the truth. "Yes," I said. "I am ready." I walked out of the office. I walked down the hallway, past my bedroom door. I didn't close it. I didn't care about that room anymore. That room belonged to a girl who didn't exist. I reached the top of the stairs. Below me, in the open-plan living room, the scene was chaotic. Marla was standing over Tessa, who was curled up on the sofa. Graham was pacing. Dylan was sitting in the corner, staring at the floor. Ronan stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed, watching them with a look of absolute revulsion. When my foot hit the first step, the sound echoed. They all stopped. They looked up. I walked down the stairs slowly. 1 step, 2 steps. I held the shoebox in both hands, like an offering or a verdict. I reached the bottom. I walked past Graham, who shrank away from me. I walked past Marla, who looked at the box with terrified recognition. I walked up to the coffee table in the center of the room. I didn't say a word. I lifted the box and slammed it down on the table. Thud. The sound was heavy, final. The lid popped off. The envelope spilled out. The black notebook slid across the glass surface. The letter from Evelyn lay right on top, the wax seal facing up like a red eye staring at them. Tessa gasped. She recognized the notebook. She recognized the handwriting on the envelopes. Marla went white. She recognized the stationery of her dead mother. I looked at them. I looked at the people who had raised me, the people who shared my DNA. "You told me I was crazy," I said. My voice was not loud, but it filled the room. "You told me I was broken. You told me I couldn't handle the truth." I pointed at the box. "I found the truth," I said. "It was in the safe, right where you hid it." I looked at Tessa. "I know about the emails, Mom. I know you called my landlords." I looked at Graham and Marla. "And I know about the $2 million, I said. "I know about 1998. I know about the washing machine." Graham's knees gave out. He actually fell, catching himself on the arm of the sofa. "Grandma told me," I said. "She left me a letter. She knew you would do this. She knew you would try to destroy me to hide your sins." I looked at Ronan. "Now I know," I said to him. "Now I know why they did it." I turned back to the room, sweeping my gaze over the wreckage of my family. "You didn't rewrite my life because you loved me," I said. "You rewrote my life because you were afraid of me." I placed my hand on the box. "And you were right to be afraid." I reached into the shoebox and pulled out a letter at random. It was still sealed, the paper crisp and white, preserving a voice that had been silenced for 3 years. The room was so quiet that the sound of my thumb tearing the envelope open sounded like fabric ripping. I unfolded the letter. It was dated 2 years ago, right around the time I was eating instant oatmeal for dinner 3 nights a week. I began to read aloud. My voice was not shaky anymore. It was clear, cutting through the stagnant air of the living room like a bell. "Dear Ivy," I read. "I saw the market analysis you posted on that blog you started. Your insights on supply chain resilience were sharper than my entire board of directors. I am so proud of the woman you are becoming. I know you are busy, but if you ever want to discuss funding for your own consultancy, the capital is yours. You do not need to earn your place at the table. Ivy, you were born for it." I lowered the paper. I looked at my mother. "He offered me capital," I said. "He offered me a career. He offered me pride." I picked up another envelope, tearing it open without breaking eye contact with Tessa. "This one is from last Christmas," I said. "He asks if I received the winter coat he sent. He worries that I'm cold in the city." I dropped the letter on the coffee table. "I never got the coat," I said. "I spent that winter wearing 3 sweaters because the heating bill was too high. I was freezing. Mom, and you knew it. You sat in this warm house, with the thermostat set to 72, and you knew I was freezing." Tessa did not look at me. She was staring at the letters scattered on the glass table as if they were evidence of a murder. And in a way, they were. They were evidence of the murder of my potential. "Why?" I asked again. "And don't tell me you were protecting me." Tessa looked up. Her face was a ruin, but there was no softness in it. There was no apology. There was only a twisted, desperate justification. "Because he would have taken you." Tessa said. Her voice was brittle. If you knew he was proud of you, if you knew he had money waiting for you, would have left us. You would have gone to him. You would have become a Blackwood. And I would just be Tessa, just the middleman. She gestured wildly at the room, at the house, at the life she had built on appearances. I needed you here, she cried. I needed you to be the mess. If you are the mess, then I am the savior. I am the good mother who takes care of her troubled daughter. It was my role, Ivy. It was the only thing that made me special in this family. It was the confession I had been waiting for, and it was uglier than I could have imagined. She hadn't kept me poor because she hated me. She kept me poor because she needed a prop for her own ego. You didn't want a daughter, I said, feeling a final, severing snap in my chest. You wanted a patient. Marla, sensing that Tessa was sinking the ship, tried to distance herself. She stood up, smoothing her skirt, trying to summon the arrogance that had served her for 40 years. Well, that is Tessa's neurosis, Marla said dismissively. My involvement was purely financial. I stepped in to manage assets that were being neglected. I demand that we separate these issues. The Evelyn Trust matter is a technicality. Callum Reed stepped forward. He did not look at his notes. He looked directly at Marla. It is not a technicality, Callum said. It is grand larceny. He placed a single sheet of paper on the table next to the shoebox. I have the transfer records from the Juniper Vale accounts. Callum said, we matched the timestamps. Every month, on the 1st, the rent from Lake Briar was deposited, and every month, on the 2nd, a transfer was made to a personal account ending in 402. Marla stiffened. That account pays the mortgage on your vacation home in Aspen, Callum said. It pays for your country club dues? It pays for the lease on your Mercedes. He pointed to another line item. And here, the investment account, the $50,000 that Graham was supposed to be managing for Ivy. There are monthly withdrawals. Callum turned to Graham. Where did that money go? Graham. My father looked at me. He looked small. He looked like a man who had spent his whole life trying to avoid conflict, only to cause the biggest war of all. I put it into the joint account, Graham whispered. Marla said we needed to cover the administrative costs of the LLC. She said legal fees were high. There were no legal fees, I shouted. You were charging me a management fee to steal my own money. I signed the papers, Graham blurted out, tears streaming down his face. I signed the power of attorney. Marla brought it to me 3 years ago. She said it was just a formality. She said, Graham, sign this so we can handle Ivy's taxes. I didn't read it. I just wanted it done. I thought it was procedure. You signed away my freedom, I said. You gave her the legal right to impersonate me. You didn't just sign a paper. Dad, you signed a permission slip for them to hunt me. Graham put his head in his hands and wept. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it would go this far. But you knew today, Ronan said. The sound of my grandfather's voice stopped the crying. It stopped the excuses. Ronan Blackwood walked to the center of the room. He looked at his 2 daughters. He looked at the man who had married his daughter. You have confessed, Ronan said. We have the recording. We have the letters. We have the ledgers. We have the bank transfers. He looked at Marla. You are done, Ronan said. As of this moment, you are removed from the Blackwood Family Trust. You are removed from the board. You are cut off. You will not receive another cent from me for as long as I live, and my will is being rewritten tonight to ensure you get nothing when I die. Marla gasped. Dad, you can't. I have debts. The Aurora loan. That is your problem, Ronan said coldly. Callum is filing the recovery suit in the morning. We are clawing back every dollar you took from Ivy. If that bankrupts you, then you will learn what poverty actually feels like. Maybe Ivy can give you some tips on how to budget for noodles. He turned to Tessa and Graham. And you, Ronan said, you are not thieves in the same way, but you are something worse. You betrayed your blood. You are cut off. The allowance stops. The access stops. You will live on your pensions, and you will not contact Ivy ever again. Ronan, please, Tessa wailed. She is my baby. She is the victim of your sickness, Ronan said, and I'm quarantining her. He nodded to Callum. Execute it. Callum took out his phone. He made a call. File the ex parte motion, Callum said into the receiver. Yes, immediate freeze, all assets under Juniper Vale. All personal accounts of Marla Vane, Tessa Parker, and Graham Parker. Initiate the forensic audit and serve the restraining orders. He hung up. The room felt lighter, as if a vacuum had been turned on and sucked out all the poison. Then, there was movement in the corner. Dylan stood up. He was holding his laptop. He walked past his mother, who was staring blankly at the wall. He walked past his aunt and uncle. He came to me. Here, Dylan said. He handed me the laptop and a flash drive. What is this? I asked. Everything, Dylan said. His voice was steady. He had made his choice. The emails where Mom told me the money was family surplus, the loan documents I signed, the text messages where she told me to ignore your questions about the estate. Marla looked up. Dylan? You are giving them the evidence against me. Dylan looked at his mother. You told me it was safe. You told me Ivy was crazy. You lied to me. Mom, and I am not going to prison for your lie. He looked at me. I am a witness. Dylan said to me, I will testify. I will tell the judge everything she did. Just please don't let them take my life. I took the drive. I looked at my cousin. He was selfish, yes, but he was also waking up. If you tell the truth, I said, the trust will protect you, but only the truth. No more spins. No more spins, Dylan agreed. I looked around the room one last time. I looked at the luxury furniture bought with stolen money. I looked at the family portraits on the mantel, smiling faces hiding rot. I am not going to destroy you, I said. I don't need to. You did that to yourselves. I picked up the shoebox of letters. I picked up the black notebook. These were mine now, my history, my truth. I am taking back what you stole, I said. Not just the money. I am taking back my reality. I am taking back my right to know who I am. I turned to Ronan. Let's go home, I said. Ronan smiled. It was a genuine smile, proud and fierce. Yes, he said. Let's go home. Epilogue. 1 year later. The air in Lake Briar was different. It was crisp, clean, and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. I stood on the balcony of the third-floor apartment, my apartment looking down at Main Street. The bakery on the ground floor was bustling, the yoga studio was full, the tenants were happy, and the rent checks came to me. I took a sip of coffee. It was good coffee, ground from beans I had bought without checking the price tag. It had been a long year. The lawsuits were brutal. Marla had filed for bankruptcy. My parents had sold their house and moved to a small condo in Florida, silenced by the non-disclosure agreements and the shame. I hadn't spoken to them since that night. I didn't miss them. That was the surprise. I didn't miss the doubt. I didn't miss the voice in my head telling me I was fragile. I walked back inside. My home office was bright and organized. On the desk sat a stack of files for my new clients. I wasn't an analyst anymore. I had started a firm, Parker Consulting. I worked with women, mostly young women, mostly in family businesses who felt like they were losing their minds. I audited their trusts. I read their contracts. I helped them find the money that was being hidden from them. I helped them find the keys to their own cages. My phone rang. It was Ronan. We spoke every Sunday. Hi, grandfather, I said. Ivy, his voice boomed. I just got the quarterly report on the Evelyn Trust. You outperformed the SP 500 by 3 points. Not bad for a beginner. I had a good teacher, I said, smiling at the framed letter on my wall, the first one he had ever sent me, the one I had retrieved from the safe. Are you coming up for Thanksgiving? Ronan asked. The chef is making chestnut stuffing. I will be there, I said. But I'm driving myself, and I am bringing the wine. Good, Ronan said. See you then. I hung up. I looked out the window at the lake shimmering in the distance. That Thanksgiving had been a nightmare. It had stripped me of my parents, my comfort, and my past, but it hadn't destroyed my family. It had just revealed who my family actually was. It stole the illusion, but in exchange, it gave me the truth. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like I had to shrink to fit into someone else's box. I took a deep breath. filling my lungs completely. I was Ivy Parker, and I had absolutely every idea about it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening on your commute, at the gym, or maybe while cooking dinner? Let me know in the comments below to share your thoughts. And please subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and hit that hype button so this story can reach more people who need to hear it.